The blizzard had been hammering the cabin for hours, but at 1:17 a.m., it paused, like the storm was taking a breath. In that quiet, I heard something I wasn't supposed to hear inside a place I'd rented to be alone. A slow scrape under the hallway floor, then a soft, careful knock from beneath the boards. My phone showed no service. The power had died at dusk, and the road behind my car was already buried. I stood there, with the Fireplace poker in my hand, staring at the Crawlspace access panel like it was staring back. I'd rented the cabin for one weekend of quiet, the kind you brag about later. The host called it cozy and private. The pictures were all warm wood and clean snow. By late afternoon, the snow stopped, looking pretty, and started looking like a wall. Wind shoved drifts against the doors. The porch light flickered, then everything went dark. I lit the oil lanterns, built a fire, and tried to make it a joke. Cabin fever is something that happens to other people, I thought. Then I found the first sign that I wasn't actually alone. It was small, a mug in the sink that wasn't in the listing photos, still damp on the rim. Then a smell in the heat vent, like old sweat trapped in fabric. Then when I pulled a blanket from the cabinet by the fridge, I saw a flattened space behind the quilts, a crushed water bottle, and a tiny flashlight wrapped in duct tape. Somebody had been using that cabinet as a hiding place. My mouth went dry. I told myself it could be the cleaner, the host, anyone. I kept telling myself that until the scraping started under the hallway. I backed into the living room, grabbed the poker from the fireplace, and turned every lock I could find, even though I knew it was pointless. Deadbolt, chain, back door latch. The cabin groaned when the wind hit it, and the glass rattled in the frames. I tried the windows anyway. Frozen shut. Painted shut. I couldn't tell. All I knew was they wouldn't open. The Crawlspace panel was a square of plywood with a brass knob. When I stepped over it, the wood flexed slightly, like there was space under it that wasn't empty. The scraping stopped. For a long 10 seconds, nothing happened. Then from below, 3 taps. Not random. A response. "Hello," I heard myself say. My voice sounded wrong, too thin for the room. "Who's down there?" A breath shallow and controlled came through the scene, and then a whisper so low I almost convinced myself it was the wind. Almost. Cold. I didn't answer. I dragged the kitchen table into the hallway and shoved it over the panel. The legs shrieked on the floor loud enough to make my nerves ring. I waited for banging, for yelling, for anything. Instead, there was silence, and that silence was worse because it meant the person was thinking. Minutes passed. Maybe longer. The lantern hissed. The fire popped. I stood at the end of the hallway like a guard in my own rental poker, raised eyes burning from not blinking. Then the table jolted just a fraction, like something heavy had pressed up beneath the panel. Another jolt, then a steady push. Wood creaked. Screws complained. The table trembled. Whoever was down there wasn't asking anymore. My mind raced through options and landed on the only thing I actually had: smoke. If someone was under the cabin, smoke would find them. I threw damp logs on the fire, closed the damper part way, and waited. Thick smoke rolled back into the room, stinging my eyes, making me cough. Under the floor, the pushing stopped. Then came frantic movement, scraping, shuffling, a body retreating deeper into the crawlspace. I ran to the back door with my keys and the lantern. The door opened an inch and jammed on a drift, packed against it like cement. I rammed my shoulder into it until it gave just enough for me to squeeze through. The cold hit like a punch. Wind stole the air from my lungs. Snow needled my face. I turned to pull the door shut and heard glass break inside the cabin. Not the hallway. The living room window. I stumbled around the side of the cabin half blind, lantern swinging. Through the snow, I saw the firelight flickering in the broken window and a dark shape moving in it. A hood, layered clothes, a person stepping into the room like they owned it. And then very clearly, I heard a short laugh. Not loud, just pleased, like a plan had finally worked. I ran for the shed I'd noticed earlier, a little structure half buried in drifts. 30 feet felt endless. I got the door open, slammed it, and leaned my weight into it. Inside was cold metal gasoline tools I couldn't see well enough to trust. I found a road flare in a plastic bin, and fumbled it to life. It hissed and burned, a violent red turning the shed into a warning beacon. Outside, the figure appeared in the white, walking toward the shed, without urgency. Not running, not searching, just coming. The flare's light hit the snow and made the wind-blown flakes look like sparks. I held it to the tiny shed window so the person couldn't miss it. They stopped. For a moment we stared at each other through glass, filmed with ice. I couldn't see their face, but I could feel their attention. They tilted their head, like they were listening to the flare's hiss. Then they raised a hand and pressed it to the window frame. The skin looked raw, scraped, like someone who'd spent a long time crawling under rough wood. They didn't leave right away. The shadow slid along the shed wall, slow and patient, and I heard snow crunch close to the door. The handle rattled once gentle, like someone testing whether fear had made me forget to latch it. Then came a soft tap on the wood 2 knocks, a pause 2 more, copying the rhythm from beneath the floor. A voice drifted through calm and almost polite. Open up. Unfreezing. The words were wrong in a way I can't explain. Not panicked, not desperate, practiced. I shoved my shoulder harder into the door and kept the flare burning at the window, letting the red light and the hiss do the talking. For a long beat, the handle stayed still. Then the footsteps backed away, crunching toward the cabin as if the person had simply moved on to the next door that might open. I didn't open the shed. I didn't speak. I just kept the flare up like a threat and a signal at the same time. The figure lingered, then slowly stepped back. I watched them turn away, back toward the cabin, disappearing into the storm as if the blizzard had swallowed them. That's when I noticed the tracks. Not mine, not theirs. A second set fresh and deep, leading from the cabin toward the tree line. Someone else had been out there close enough to leave prints that hadn't filled in yet. The Crawlspace man hadn't been the only stranger in that storm. I burned the flare down to my fingers. Hours later, a snowplow's yellow light pushed through the white like sunrise. I screamed until the driver saw me and swung the cab around. As he helped me into the cab heat, flooding my skin in painful waves, I started shaking so hard my teeth clicked. At daylight, the plow driver radioed the county sheriff and took me back. The front door hung open, my lamp still on the floor. The Crawlspace panel had been unscrewed from the inside. The nest was gone. As he pulled me inside, heat flooding my skin in painful waves, I looked back at the cabin one last time. The broken window was a black mouth now. Snow was already erasing the tracks into the trees. And under that hallway floor beneath the table I dragged the Crawlspace, waited quietly like it could hold its breath forever. He was already on my porch when I pulled the curtain back, and he looked like he had stepped out of the storm itself. Snow packed his hood. His eyelashes were rimmed in ice, but the smile he gave me through the glass was warm, practiced, almost friendly. Then he placed his palm on my front door and said softly and clearly, "Let me in." It's freezing. The power was out, my phone showed no service, and the only road to town had closed an hour ago. I didn't open the door. I didn't even answer. I just stood there, listening to the wind hit the house like fists. I had rented the lake house for one quiet winter. Weak books, firewood, and the kind of silence that makes you feel like a better person. By late afternoon, the snow stopped, looking pretty and started looking like a wall. Wind shoved drifts against the doors. At dusk, the lights flickered, then died for good. I lit candles, fed the fireplace, and checked every lock twice. I remember feeling proud of myself for being careful. At Ziche Patruzic, Shitreipu, M. The doorbell rang. Nobody visits lake houses during a blizzard. The sound was so normal it felt wrong. The bell rang again. Then 3 neat knocks. I stayed out of sight of the sidelight window and spoke through the wood. "Who is it?" A man's voice, steady and calm. "I'm sorry. My car slid off the road. I just need to warm up for a minute." I wanted to help. That was the dangerous part. "Are you hurt?" "No," he said too fast. "Just cold. Please open up." "What's your name?" I asked. A pause. "Mark." I glanced at the driveway. No headlights. New car. Just a flat white drift where my tire tracks had been an hour earlier. I can call someone, I said. I don't know if it'll go through, but just open the door, he said, still polite. I'm right here. Something about the last words tightened my stomach like a correction. I forced myself to keep the conversation going through the door since silence felt like surrender. Where did you crash? I asked. What color is your car? Another pause, then a sigh, like I was being difficult. Dark. Look, ma'am, the storm's bad. Just open up. My skin prickled at the word ma'am. He hadn't sounded young, but he didn't sound old either, controlled. I stepped closer to the peephole and saw something that made throat tighten. His jacket and hood were dusted with snow, but the fabric beneath looked dry like he hadn't been out there long. I'm not opening the door, I said. I'll leave a blanket outside. I'll try the radio. His smile didn't move, but his eyes hardened. Don't do that, he whispered, and then louder as if correcting me. Don't open the door. Yet. He leaned in until his breath fogged the glass, and I realized he was close enough to hear me swallow. I didn't touch the deadbolt. I backed away and peeked through the curtain. He had moved closer to the glass face, angled toward the crack, as if he could hear my heartbeat. When I didn't move, he knocked again. Not on the door this time, but on the window beside it. Tap. To do, R, tap. Tap, gentle, precise. I tried the back door. It opened 2 inches and jammed against snow packed hard as concrete. I shoved until my shoulder hurt. Nothing. The storm had sealed me in, and Mark clearly knew it. The tapping stopped. For half a second I thought he'd left. Then a knock came from the living room window. Not the front door. I saw his silhouette at the glass, head tilted, staring at my fire, like he was admiring it. I hadn't heard him walk there. The snow should have crunched, but the wind was roaring again, and he moved exactly when the storm would hide him. I kept my voice low. Go back to the door, I said. I'm getting help. His face pressed closer to the pane. Chapped lips. Skin red from cold. Eyes alert. Focused. That same smile. I don't need help, he said. I need in. Then he started circling the house. I heard the scrape of his glove alongside the soft thud of his palm against each window as he tested it. Tap, pausa tap. Like counting. Like learning. When he reached my bedroom window, he leaned down and peered through the curtains until I yanked them shut. He didn't leave. He just breathed on the glass and whispered, I can see you. I ran to the closet and found the old battery radio the owner kept for storms. Static. Then a weather loop. Roads closed. Stay indoors. Do not travel. I turned it up anyway because noise made the house feel less empty. The knocking stopped. A new sound took its place. A delicate clink of metal at the mudroom door. The cheap handle turned slowly, not forcing, not rushing turning like it belonged to him. Cold air spilled in. A shadow filled the opening. His voice came through the gap, softer now, almost tender. See, that's better. You don't have to be scared. I grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, a cast iron skillet, and backed into the kitchen corner. Get out, I shouted, voice cracking. He laughed short and pleased, and pushed the door wider with his shoulder. I saw his bare hand on the knob, red and shaking, not from cold, from excitement. I ran upstairs to the loft, the only room with a window over the lake, and shoved a dresser in front of the door. Downstairs, footsteps moved through my kitchen like he was checking off a list. Cabinets opened. Drawers slid. He called up in a friendly voice. You can come down. I'm not mad. I crouched by the loft window and finally noticed the footprints outside, under the dead porch fixture. Not one set leading up and one leading away. Loops and circles, back and forth paths. Like he'd been out there a while, deciding where I would look first. The welcome binder mentioned a flare gun for emergencies. I tore through drawers until I found the plastic case. One flare. I cracked the loft window and fired. The red light burst into the white night, bright enough to turn the lake into a sheet of blood-colored glass. Below me, his head snapped up. Then he ran upstairs. Boots hit the steps hard now. The dresser shuddered when he slammed into it. Open it, he said, voice flat. Open it right now. I didn't. Fingers reached through the widening gap as the door gave. I swung the fireplace poker down as hard as I could. He hissed, laughed, and shoved again. A horn blared outside, long and angry close. Headlights sliced through the snow, sweeping across the lake like a lighthouse beam. The flare had worked. The man stopped pushing. For a heartbeat, the house was silent except for my breathing. Then his footsteps retreated fast, down the stairs. The back door slammed. I dragged the dresser away and ran downstairs screaming. A snowplow sat in my driveway engine, roaring driver in a reflective jacket, yelling for me to get in. I ran to him, like he was solid ground. As the plow turned around, lights washing the trees, I saw Mark one last time, a shape at the tree line half hidden by blowing snow watching us leave. He lifted his hand and waved slow and casual like we were neighbors. At daylight, the sheriff walked the property with me. The mudroom lock was scratched, and the spare key that should have been hanging on its hook was gone. The deputy told me it was probably a drifter who'd gotten lucky with an old lock. But when we checked the snow, the tracks didn't come from the road. They started at the back of my house, right where the drifts were deepest, as if he'd been waiting there before I ever heard the doorbell. The moment I realized the blizzard had trapped me in that gas station with him, the front door made a sound I still hear in my sleep. A soft click as the automatic lock engaged, followed by a slow rattle of someone trying the handle from the core. Inside, not outside. I was the only employee on the overnight shift. The phones were dead. The highway had been officially closed, and the man in the dark parka smiled at me, like he had been waiting for that click all night. By midnight, the snow was so thick, the canopy lights looked like they were shining through milk. The pumps were down, the card reader kept rebooting, and my weather radio looped the same. Warning roads closed. Stay put. At 1237, the bell chimed, and a man stepped in as if the storm had delivered him. Hood up, shoulders broad, snow clinging in clumps, but his boots were not as wet as they should have been. He walked the aisles without picking anything up, circling in a slow orbit that kept me in his line of sight through the shelves. When he finally came to the counter, he set down one item, a bottle of water. Cash only, I told him. He paid with a crisp 20 that did not look like it had been folded all night. As I handed him change, he leaned close enough that I smelled something sharp under the cold air, like gasoline and metal. "Any other customers coming?" he asked. "Not in this weather," I said, forcing a laugh. He watched me laugh and did not join in. "Good," he said, and left. I waited for relief to settle. It did not. The store felt different, like the air had been rearranged. 10 minutes later, my camera monitor flickered into static and went black. 5 minutes after that, I heard the bathroom latch click. I had not heard the bell. I had not heard footsteps. But the latch clicked gentle, like someone who did not want to be noticed. I grabbed the cheap baseball bat under the counter and moved down the darkened aisle toward the back. Half the lights were out, turning the shelves into tall shadows. The bathroom door opened a few inches and the man leaned out, smiling. "Sorry," he said. "Had to wash my hands." He held up wet fingers, like proof. "How did you get back in?" I asked. His smile widened. Door was not all the way shut. I knew that was a lie, because I always listened for the lock. He drifted toward the counter again, unhurried, like he was touring the place. "Cigarettes?" he asked. I told him cash only again. He produced another crisp bill and waited while I opened the cabinet. The hairs on my arms lifted. I could feel him behind me, too close. "You live around here?" he asked. "No, just work. Where do you go after?" he asked. I shut the cabinet harder than I needed to. His face went blank, not angry, just empty. "Okay," he said, just making conversation. He took the pack and did not leave. He stood by the coffee station, staring at the steaming pot. "Storm is bad," he said. "Might be here a while." "Then sit by the window," I said. He smiled. "I cannot. Too cold near the glass." He stepped back to the counter. "Let me see the back room," he said. "Employees only." "I know," he said. "That is why." I tightened my grip on the bat. and said, "No." He nodded slowly, like he respected the answer, then said almost kindly, "You are going to get tired. Nobody is coming." I tried my phone again, even knowing it would fail. Call failed. He watched the screen glow and nodded as if confirming something. Then he reached back and pulled the front door fully shut with exaggerated care. Click. The lock engaged. This time he did not pretend it was an accident. He rested his palm on the counter like he was claiming it. "Now," he said, "we can talk." I heard my own voice go small. "Take the cash and go." He chuckled. "Cash is useless. No roads." He leaned in. I won the keys. The master keys hung under the register. I did not move. His eyes dropped to the bat. "That thing is for people who are afraid," he said. "I'm not afraid." Then he stepped around the counter fast. I swung at his shoulder. The bat connected with a solid thud that jolted my arms. He grunted, grabbed the barrel and yanked it out of my hands like it was a toy. He tossed it aside and kept coming curious, more than furious, like he was testing how much fight I had. I backed toward the walk-in cooler. Cold could kill, but cold could also hide. I tore the heavy door open and threw myself inside, slamming it shut and twisting the inside handle. The air was brutal. My breath turned to fog instantly. From the other side I heard his boots approach, then the latch, tested once gentle. A low laugh came through the metal. "Smart," he said, "but you have to come out sometime." He did not leave me alone in there. After the first laugh, he started talking in that calm, conversational tone as if we were neighbors waiting out a storm. "What is your name?" he asked. I did not answer. "Your tag says it," he continued, and my stomach knotted because I had forgotten I was wearing it. His knuckles tapped the cooler door twice, then twice again, the same rhythm every time, like a habit. "You can make this easy," he said. "You open up, you hand me the keys, and you go back to being warm." I heard him walk away, then return with something that clinked against the latch, metal on metal, as if he was trying a tool. The latch held. He sighed, not frustrated, just patient. A minute later, the cooler light flickered. The compressor whined, coughed, and fell silent. The hum that had been my only proof of time stopped. The cold stopped deepening and turned into a steady, waiting chill. He had found the breaker. In the dark, I pressed my phone screen against my palm for light and watched my own breath slow as panic tried to speed it up. From outside the door, his voice came again, softer now. "See, you are already getting tired. There's just you and me, until morning." I held the emergency cord and listened for him to leave, but his boots stayed close, scraping lightly like he was sitting down to wait me out. He started humming almost cheerful, and I heard drawers open the office door, creak the safe handle, rattle, all of it happening with the unhurried confidence of someone who had done this before. Once he pressed his face close to the metal and whispered, "Do not make me break it," like the cooler door had feelings. Minutes passed. Then a new sound cut through the wind and the silence, a deep engine and the crunching scrape of a blade. A snowplow close. I pounded the door and screamed until my throat burned. Outside, the man went silent. Footsteps moved away from the cooler quick, now no longer patient. The front door alarm chirped as it opened. Cold air rushed into the store, and then only the storm. When the plow finally stopped, the driver peered into the dark store like it was empty. I kicked the cooler door until it popped, and stumbled out yelling. He rushed in, radioing for police, and wrapped his coat around my shoulders. While I tried to explain, shaking so hard my jaw hurt, I noticed the front lock intact, unforced. Later, the police found a ceiling tile in the bathroom, pushed aside, insulation disturbed, like a nest. The blizzard had not brought him to me. It had only made sure I could not leave. I booked the Airbnb because it promised entire cabin self-check-in, total privacy. And when I arrived in the whiteout, the first thing I saw through the frosted front window was a man sitting in the dark living room, perfectly still, like he had been waiting for me to turn the key. For a breath I thought I had the wrong place. Then his head lifted toward the door, and he smiled like a host greeting a guest, not a stranger, inside a rental. My phone had lost service halfway up the mountain. The power lines were already sagging with ice, and the road behind my car was disappearing under fresh drift. The lockbox code worked. The porch light was on. Everything said safe. I opened the door anyway because cold makes you choose warmth over instinct. The man stood slowly, hands visible. "You must be Emily," he said. I had not told him my name in messages. "Who are you?" I asked, staying in the doorway. "Greg," he said. "Owner, I am so sorry. Boiler has been acting up. I came to check it before you arrived." He gestured down the hallway, like that was the end of it. The fireplace was lit the room warm, and my body wanted to believe him. "Okay," I said. "So you are leaving?" His smile stayed in place. "Normally, yes," he said. "But the county is closing the road. I do not want to drive down in this. I will sleep out here, just in case the heat fails." The listing had not mentioned the owner staying on site. "No," I said. "I am not comfortable with that. I booked the entire place." Greg nodded patient like he had practiced this conversation. "You can cancel and I will refund you," he said. "But you are not getting down tonight. No service. No plows until morning." He said it like the storm had made the decision for both of us. The lights flickered. He pointed at the ceiling like it proved his point. "If the generator does not kick in, you will want me nearby." Then he walked into the kitchen, opened a drawer and pulled out a flashlight, as if he knew exactly where it was. That is when I noticed his boots by the heater vent and a duffel bag under the bench. He had not just arrived. He had been there. The air smelled faintly of reheated soup, and on the counter a spoon sat in a bowl that was still warm like dinner had just ended. "Where is your car?" I asked. He nodded toward the window. "Down the drive. You do not want to go back out there." "I am leaving," I said. "I will go to town." He tilted his head, still calm. "You cannot," he said. "Also, you do not have your keys." I patted my coat pockets. Empty. I had set my keys on the entry table when I came in, and now they were gone. He lifted his open hands. "Probably Phil," he said. "We can look." I stepped toward the entry table and saw my key ring on the floor, but placed under the edge of the rug, just far enough that I would have to kneel and reach. Greg watched me waiting. I did not kneel. "I am calling someone," I said. He nodded toward my phone. "No service," he reminded me gentle. "There is a landline." He pointed to a corded phone by the pantry. I picked it up. Dead tone. Greg sighed, like the house had disappointed him. "Storm takes it," he said. He sat on the couch, like this was his living room, and clicked the TV on and off, all static. Then he looked at me with that steady smile. "You can sleep in the bedroom. I will stay out here." I did not argue. I smiled the way you smile when you want someone to think you are compliant. Then I went down the hallway to find another exit. The back door was there, but it was bolted with a thick sliding bar, the kind you install when you expect someone to try to leave. It did not move. In the bedroom, the window was rimmed with ice. I tried it. It barely budged. I heard Greg moving in the living room, slow and deliberate. A drawer opened. Something metallic clinked. Then my phone, which had been charging on the nightstand, went dark. The charger had been unplugged. He had walked into the hallway at some point and done it quietly. From outside my door, Greg called softly, "Emily, do you need anything?" His voice sounded sweet, almost intimate, like we shared this place. I did not answer. A minute later, the floorboard outside my room creaked and stopped. The thin line of light under the door dimmed. He was standing there, listening. I held my breath until my lungs burned. After a long minute, the shadow moved away. Then I heard the front door lock, turning not once, but again and again, each click slow enough that I could not miss it. He wanted me to hear that the storm was not the only thing keeping me inside. After the last click, footsteps came back down the hallway. My doorknob turned slowly, testing, not forcing. He could have been checking if I had locked it, but it felt like he was letting me know he could reach me anytime he wanted. His voice slid under the door in a whisper. Emily, you do not have to make this dramatic. A pause. Then softer, almost amused. I can wait. I heard him inhale near the crack like he was smelling the room. And then the floorboard creaked as he backed away again, unhurried. I slid off the bed and crawled to the window. In the pale light I noticed something that made my stomach sink. The screws along the frame were new and bright. Somebody had taken this window out recently and put it back in. I pressed along the bottom corner and felt a thin draft, a place where ice had not sealed it fully. I used the metal curtain rod as a lever prying millimeter by millimeter until the sash gave. Cold poured in like water. I opened it just enough to squeeze through, dropped into a drift up to my thighs and fought my way toward my car. The driver's side was buried. The passenger side opened with a groan. I threw myself inside and slammed the door. No keys. Of course. Behind me the cabin door opened and warm light spilled onto the snow. Greg stood on the porch, in socks calm as ever. He did not shout. He did not run. He simply said conversationally, "Do not do that. You will hurt yourself." He approached the car slowly and leaned toward the glass, smiling. "See," he said. No keys. Then another sound joined the wind. An engine far at first, then closer, heavy and grinding. A plow? Headlights cut through the white. Greg's smile twitched. He looked toward the road calculation, replacing warmth. I slammed my palm on the horn and held it down until it became one long scream. The plow slowed in front of the cabin driver, staring at the scene. Greg called out loud and cheerful, "Everything is fine, she is just panicking." I did not stop. I opened the car door and screamed for help until my voice broke. The driver got out, with a shovel and a radio. Greg took one step toward me, then stepped back, lifting his hands like I was the problem, and disappeared into the blowing snow as if he belonged to it. When the sheriff arrived, later Greg was gone. The lockbox code had been changed. Out back, the workshop was not a workshop at all. It was a small, heated room, with a bed, a space heater, and a shelf of spare phone chargers lined up like trophies. On the kitchen counter, beside the flashlight, he had used my keyring. He sat neatly next to the welcome binder, not hidden, not lost, placed. Like he wanted to prove the point, he could decide when I had options and when I did not. By morning the storm had softened and my phone had service again, but Greg's listing had vanished from the app, his messages replaced by blank placeholders, like the cabin had never been offered at all. The first time I realized the night guard wasn't trying to keep me safe was when he locked the stairwell door from the security desk, and then in the dim emergency lights asked me to hand over my phone so we can conserve battery. Outside the glass lobby walls, the blizzard was a moving white curtain. The streets were empty, and the office I'd stayed late in had turned into a sealed aquarium with only 2 people inside me and the man who controlled every keycard reader. I'd volunteered to finish a year-end compliance deck because my manager promised it would look good. And by the time the last co-workers left, the snow had already buried the curb lines and turned the parking garage ramp into a slick. Oh shoot. The building was the kind of place that felt untouchable in daylight marble lobby, polished steel silent elevators. At night, with the city under a travel ban and the power flickering, it felt like a bunker that didn't care if you ever got out. I watched the weather alert crawl across my laptop right before the Wi-Fi died. Travel. Ban. Effective. Immediately seek shelter. Then the lights blinked, once, twice, and went out with the same final sound every appliance makes when it gives up. Emergency strips along the floor came on, and somewhere deep in the building, a generator hummed like a tired animal. I packed my bag fast and headed for the elevators. The call button didn't light. The doors didn't open. I tried the stairwell. The push bar didn't budge. That's when I heard footsteps behind me and the soft jingle of keys. "Ma'am," a voice cold, calm and practiced. "You can't leave that way." A uniformed security guard came into view, maybe late 50s, heavy jacket, flashlight in hand. "His name patch," said Doran. He wore the relaxed posture of someone who has spent years being ignored. "Doors auto-lock in an outage," he said. "Safety feature." He sounded almost proud of it. I asked him to unlock it. He nodded like it was obvious he would, then turned and walked back toward the lobby without waiting for me, assuming I'd follow. I did, because what else do you do when the building has decided you're inside? He led me to the security desk, glass partition monitors, dark, except one backup camera that showed the empty lobby like a still photograph. Darren pulled a key from a ring and opened a small panel under the desk. He flipped a switch. The camera feed brightened. Then he did something that didn't match the safety feature story at all. He clicked his mouse, and I heard a heavy mechanical clunk somewhere behind me, followed by another clunk like doors sealing. There he sat. Now we're secure. I asked what he meant by we. He glanced at me, as if that was a strange question. Storm's shutting everything down, he said. No one's coming tonight. Best thing is to wait it out here. I've got heat in the security office. He leaned forward slightly, smiling the way people smile when they're offering help. That's really a decision. And you should turn your phone off. Save it. Battery's precious. I held my phone tighter. I'm calling someone. He didn't argue. He just watched my screen, like he already knew what it would say. No service. I tried again. Nothing. Darren nodded once satisfied. See, he said. We just have to be smart. I asked if there was a landline. He gestured down the hall. Conference room phones. But they're VoIP. Without internet, they're paperweights. Then in the same tone he added, unless you know how to route a call through the emergency panel. I do. He waited for me to ask him to. I didn't. I said I was going to sit in the lobby, where there were windows, and where anyone outside might see me. For the first time his smile wavered. Too cold near the glass, he said, quickly. And you don't want to be in an open area. If something happens... He let the sentence hang like bait. What would happen, I asked. He stared at me for a beat too long, then chuckled softly. Cabin fever, he said. People do dumb things when they think they're alone. He reached under the desk again, and the same mechanical clunk sounded closer this time, and the stairwell door behind the lobby clicked, as if it had been latched from the inside. I felt heat rise in my chest. Did you just lock the stairwell? I asked. He shrugged, casual. Protocol. Building's my responsibility. I backed away from the desk toward the revolving door, and he lifted his flashlight slightly, not shining it at me, just reminding me he could. That door won't open, he said. Pressure's wrong in a storm, and it'll alarm. You don't want to set off alarms, trust me. The way he said trust me made my skin tighten. I walked toward the employee entrance to the garage, hoping I could at least get to my car and lock myself in it, even if I couldn't drive. The badge reader blinked, red. Darren's voice came from the ceiling speaker above me, smooth and intimate, like he was standing beside my ear. Garage is closed, he said. Stay where I can see you. I froze. There were still cameras. He had power to what he wanted powered. I turned around slowly and walked back toward the lobby, making myself look cooperative, because fear had finally done the math. No signal, no exits, snow cutting off the street, and a man who had just proved he could follow me without moving. At the desk he was watching a monitor I couldn't see. You're smart, he said, like he was complimenting a pet for returning. Some people panic. You didn't. I asked him why he was talking to me like that. His eyes flicked up and down my soaked hair, my badge lanyard, the name printed on it, and his smile returned steady now. Because I've seen you, he said. Late nights, Tuesdays, sometimes Fridays. You always bring the same green water bottle. You always leave at... He paused, as if reading from memory. 9:40-ish. Except tonight. My stomach dropped. That's not it is, he said, gently correcting me. I watch screens for a living. People think they're invisible. They're not. He leaned back, hands folded, relaxed in a way that felt obscene. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to sit in the security office, where it's warm. You're going to stop wandering around setting off sensors. And in the morning, if the roads are cleared, we'll both go home. The word both landed wrong. And if I don't, I asked. He tilted his hand. Then you get tired, he said, as if it were a law of nature. And tired people make mistakes. I forced my voice steady. You're on camera. He smiled wider. Most of them are on my recorder, he said, and my recorder is off. He tapped the side of his desk. Storms do that. Power surges. Data loss. Terrible. He stood finally, and the movement made me flinch because it was the first time he looked like he might actually cross the distance between us. Come on, he said, and started toward the hallway that led to the security office, the one place without windows. I didn't follow. Instead, I walked to the wall by the lobby and stared at the red fire alarm box behind glass. Darren noticed and laughed softly, like he was amused by the idea. That's monitored through the same network, he said. No internet, no call-out. He thought he'd closed every option. That's what made him sloppy. He didn't notice the manual pull station beside it, the older one with a physical line installed back when codes required redundancy. I slid my keyring under the glass box edge and yanked hard. The glass cracked. The alarm didn't sound yet, not until I hooked my fingers around the pull handle and dragged it down with my whole weight. The building erupted, sirens, strobes, the kind of noise designed to make people move. Darren's face changed so fast, I'll never forget it. The polite mask dropped, replaced by pure irritation, like I'd ruined his evening. He lunged, but I was already running, not toward the locked stairwell, but toward the loading dock corridor. I'd passed 100 times without noticing the one with the heavy fire door, that by law could not be electronically locked from inside. The strobes painted the hall in violent pulses. I slammed through the fire door and felt cold air knife into my lungs. Snow whipped into the dock like smoke. Behind me, Darren shouted my name, my actual name, because he'd read it off my badge and wanted me to know he owned that too. I didn't stop. I ran along the dock wall until I found the exterior emergency exit. The push bar gave. An alarm screamed above the blizzard higher and rawer than the building's siren. I threw myself outside into waist-high drifts and almost fell, but I saw something through the white, a slow-moving yellow light, the sweep of a snowplow blade on the street below. I waved both arms like I was drowning. The plow hesitated, then turned headlights, stabbing the storm. Darren reached the doorway behind me and stopped, just inside the warmth, watching. He didn't chase into the snow. He didn't need to. He expected the storm to finish what he started. But the plow driver got out anyway, shouting, boots, crunching, and when he saw me, he didn't ask questions. First, he grabbed my arm and hauled me toward the cab. The moment I was inside heat, flooding my hands in painful bursts, I saw Darren step back into the building and the fire door swing shut between us, sealing him away like nothing had happened. Later, police searched the security desk. They found the network recorder unplugged. They found a printed list of employee schedules, tucked under the keyboard highlighted in yellow. And in the half-open drawer, face down like a sleeping animal, was my phone still on, still mine, but out of my hands. Proof that the very first thing he asked for had never been about saving battery at all. The first knock sounded normal, the kind of neighborly knock you get when the storm knocks out power and everyone pretends they're a community again. The second knock sounded like he was already annoyed I hadn't answered. By the third, he wasn't knocking on my door anymore. He was knocking on the window beside it, hard enough to rattle the glass, and his voice slid through the seam like he'd practiced sounding concerned. "Hey, it's Tom, from next door. Are you okay in there?" Outside, the blizzard turned the hallway window into a sheet of white noise, and the building's emergency lights made everything look bruised and underwater. I lived alone on the third floor of a small complex, where you learn your neighbor's habits the way you learn weather, who slams doors, who smokes outside, who plays music too loud. I'd seen Tom a handful of times, mostly in passing, always polite, always just a little too interested in whether I was settling in. That night, the power died around 8. The heat went with it, and my phone slipped to 1 bar, and then none. I lit candles, piled blankets on the couch, and told myself it was just a storm. Then, the knock came. I stayed quiet, and watched through the peephole. A man stood there, with his hood down, hair damp, cheeks red from cold. He held a flashlight like a prop. When he noticed the peephole shadow shift, his mouth lifted into a relieved smile. "Thank God," he said. "I've been checking units. Management said we should make sure nobody's stuck. You got heat." I didn't like how easily the words came out, how ready the story was. "I'm fine," I said, through the door. "I'm not opening it." His smile stayed, but something behind it tightened. "It's freezing," he said, then softened his tone again like he'd remembered he was supposed to be nice. "Just let me take a quick look at your thermostat. Sometimes they trip." "No," I said. "Go check on someone else." He exhaled loud enough for me to hear it through the door, like I'd inconvenienced him. "Okay," he said. "Okay, I get it." He leaned closer. "But if your pipes freeze, that's a whole building problem." Then he did something small that made my stomach go cold. He touched the doorknob with his bare hand and turned it gently, just to show me it moved. It was locked. It didn't open. He didn't force it. He just let it click back into place, calm, as a man confirming a fact. "All right," he said. "Stay warm." His footsteps moved away down the hall. I waited until I couldn't hear him. Then I checked my deadbolt twice and slid the chain into place, even though I knew a chain is just comfort. Around 10, I heard the elevator groan and stop, then nothing. The building settled into a hush, broken only by wind slapping the windows. I was starting to relax when a new sound came from my door. A soft metallic scrape, like a key, being guided into a lock, very carefully. The knob turned. The deadbolt held for half a second, then clicked as if someone on the outside knew exactly how much pressure to apply. My mouth went dry. The chain caught, jerking the door open an inch. A sliver of hallway light cut into my apartment. "Hey, Tom," whispered. "It's me. Don't freak out." I backed away so fast I nearly tripped over the coffee table. "How did you spare key?" he said. Like that explained everything. "I told you management wanted checks. Pipes heat, all that. Your lock sticks. Sometimes, you know." The fact he knew anything about my lock made my skin prickle. He pushed the door again, and the chain strained. His fingers slipped through the gap, not grabbing yet, just testing the space like he was feeling the shape of my fear. "Open the chain," he said. "You're making it weird." "Get out," I said, voice shaking, despite me hating that it shook. I reached for my phone and held it up like a weapon, even though it was useless. He left, softly. "No service," he said, not guessing, stating. "This building's a dead spot, even on a good day." He pressed his cheek to the gap and spoke in a tone that tried to sound gentle. "Look, I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to help. You want me to just walk away and let you freeze?" His breath smelled faintly like coffee and something chemical like hand sanitizer. I didn't answer. I grabbed a kitchen chair and jammed it under the door handle, then retreated to the hallway inside my apartment, keeping distance. The chain held, but he didn't stop. He rocked the door, not hard enough to snap it, just enough to make the screws complain. "Come on," he whispered. "I can hear you breathing." A beat, then softer, almost amused. "You should have answered earlier." Now I'm worried. I forced myself to move quietly toward my kitchen, where the back window opened onto the fire escape. When I got there, my stomach sank. The window was locked with a small latch, but a thin strip of tape had been placed over it. The kind painters use, neatly pressed down, something I had not done. Someone had touched this window before tonight. In the living room, the chair scraped as the door shuttered again. I heard a tiny crack wood, splitting a screw giving way. "Okay," he sighed, like I was making him work. "Okay, we'll do it the hard way." I went cold all over. I grabbed the heaviest thing near my hand, a cast iron pan, and backed into the bathroom because it had the only door that locked from the inside. I clicked it shut and turned the lock, then held my breath, listening. The chain snapped with a sharp metallic pop. The door swung wider. Footsteps entered my apartment, slow and confident, like he'd been invited. He didn't call my name. He didn't rush. He just walked the space, letting me hear him claim it. A cabinet opened. A drawer slid out. My pantry door creaked. He was looking through my things, like he had all the time in the world. "You keep candles," he said conversationally, and my throat tightened because he was close enough to see them on the table. "Smart. And you've got water. Also smart." He paused. "But you don't have much food, do you? You should stock up." He sounded like a scolding friend. Then his voice dropped intimate right outside the bathroom door. "I can smell your shampoo," he said. Lavender. That's nice. My hands clenched around the pan handle until my knuckles hurt. The doorknob turned slowly. Locked. He tried once gentle, then stopped. Okay, he murmured. We'll wait. I heard him sit on my couch, the cushions compressing. The storm howled outside like it was cheering him on. Minutes dragged. He started humming quiet, almost soothing. Then in the middle of the hum he said, "If you swing that pan, you'll regret it," like he could see through the door. I'm the one, with the key. The word key hit me like ice water. I remembered something the previous tenant had joked about when I moved in. The maintenance guy has spares for everything. I thought about my landlord asleep somewhere warm, about the travel ban, about how no one was coming. My chest tightened until it felt hard to breathe. That's when an idea surfaced, ugly but simple noise. Not a phone call, not a plea, just noise the building couldn't ignore. Above my sink was a carbon monoxide detector with a battery backup. I yanked it off the wall and pressed the test button. The alarm screamed high and relentless, the kind of sound that drills straight into teeth. In the living room, Tom swore under his breath, the first real crack in his calm. "Turn that off," he snapped, then caught himself and softened. Hey, you're gonna wake people. It's fine. Just turn it off." I hit the button again and again, keeping it blaring, then I threw the bathroom door open and sprinted for the front door while the sound tore through the apartment. Tom moved fast, too fast, for a man who claimed he was just checking pipes, but the alarm had done its job. Doors up and down the hall opened. Voices shouted. Someone yelled. "What's happening?" I shoved my apartment door open and ran into the hallway, screaming for help. Tom stepped out behind me and tried to smile. Tried to look like the reasonable one, but the panic on his face flashed before he could hide it. A neighbor in sweatpants charged forward, and another person started filming on their phone, the screen bright in the darkness. Tom backed up, hands raised, saying, "She's having a breakdown. I was just trying to." But his words tangled, because now there were witnesses. A man grabbed Tom's wrist and demanded, "Why are you in her apartment?" Tom's eyes flicked down the hall, calculating exits, and then he did what predators do. When the room stops belonging to them, he fled. He bolted for the stairwell. Someone chased. Someone else called 911 the moment their phone caught a sliver of service near the window. When police arrived, they found my chain snapped and the doorframe splintered in a way that wasn't helpful checking. They went to the unit next door. The apartment was empty, colder than mine, like nobody had lived there in days. The name Tom wasn't on any mailbox. Management swore no one had been authorized to do checks. And when an officer asked me how we got in, I pointed to the lock and said, "A spare key." The officer's jaw tightened, like he already knew what that meant. Later, when they finally restored power, my landlord met me in the lobby, pale and apologizing, insisting there was only one spare set locked in a box downstairs. The police opened that box. Inside, among neatly labeled tags, sat a small brass key on a white plastic fob that read simply, "Spare," except the hook it should have been hanging from was empty, and the dust around it showed a clean gap where a key had been taken and returned. Taken and returned, long before the storm ever gave him the courage to use it. I knew something was wrong the second the cabin door opened from the inside, because my code had just worked. My suitcase was still in my hand, and a woman I'd never met was standing there in wool socks, holding a kitchen knife like she'd been, waiting for a stranger to walk in. The blizzard behind me erased the driveway in real time. My car was already half buried, and my phone had dropped to no service somewhere down the mountain. For a long beat, we just stared at each other. Two people frozen between the promise of entire place to yourself and the reality that we were now sharing a small wooden box in a storm that would not let either of us leave. "Who are you?" she asked, voice tight, knife not raised but not lowered either. I held my hands up and showed my own phone screen with the reservation pulled up. "I'm renting this place," I said. I checked in under my name. "I have the code." Her eyes flicked to the screen, then back to my face. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept, and that tiredness made her more dangerous, not less, because exhaustion turns caution into impatience. "So am I," she said, and in one quick movement she stepped back and pointed the knife toward the living room like it was an invitation. "Come in slow. Don't do anything stupid." The cabin was warm, which meant she'd been here long enough to build a fire and settle in. A pot simmered on the stove. A blanket was draped over the couch with a shape in it like someone had been sitting there for a while. The place smelled like pine smoke and onion soup and something sour under it like wet wool. "My name's Claire," she said, and finally she set the knife on the counter, but she didn't take her eyes off me. "I got here at 3. The host said the road would close. I'm not leaving tonight. So if this is some scam, you picked the worst night." "I'm not scamming you," I said. "I drove 4 hours. I paid. I have the messages." I scrolled, showing her the confirmation, the code, the cheery automated line about privacy and peaceful solitude. Claire's jaw tightened. "Mine says the same," she murmured, and a thin layer of anger slid over her fear. "Double booked." She said it like a curse. We both tried calling the host. Straight to voicemail. We tried the platform support line. No service. The storm pressed against the windows in long whining breaths, and the cabin creaked the way old wood does when the temperature drops. We were stuck with the same options: go back outside and risk the mountain road, or share the cabin and pretend 2 strangers could keep it civilized while the world turned white. "We can split the space," I said. "You take the bedroom. I'll take the couch. We keep our phones, our keys, we don't touch each other's stuff." Claire watched me like she was measuring whether I believed my own plan. Then she nodded once sharp. "Fine," she said. "But if you try anything, I'll make noise until the whole mountain hears it." "Good," I said. "Do that." For an hour, it almost worked. We kept distance. We spoke only when we had to. I sat by the fireplace with my bag in my lap like a shield. She moved around the kitchen with clipped efficiency, making tea, checking locks, peering through the frosted window as if she expected someone else to appear. The wind rose and fell. Ice ticked against the glass. Somewhere near the roofline, something thumped, like a branch hitting siding. Claire's shoulders jumped at every sound. Cabin fever doesn't start as madness. It starts as hypervigilance, the feeling that the walls are listening. Et opt doisprezecipu. While Claire was in the bathroom, I heard a quiet chime from the hallway closet, the kind of noise a door makes when it shifts on its hinges. I stood slowly and walked toward it. The closet door was slightly open, just a crack. I hadn't touched it. I pushed it wider with the fireplace poker and saw the water heater and shelves of spare linens. Nothing else. But on the top shelf, tucked behind the folded blankets, was a small battery-powered baby monitor, its green light blinking. My stomach sank. I picked it up. The speaker hissed. Then I heard breathing, slow, controlled, coming through it, as if someone else somewhere was listening to us and letting us hear that they were there. I turned it off and shoved it into my pocket. When Claire came out, I didn't tell her right away. I didn't want to light a match inside a room already full of fumes. But then she said casual and false. "Did you touch my bag?" I looked at her. Her duffel sat where it had been by the bench. "No," I said. "Why?" She swallowed. "My wallet was on top. Now it's not." We stared at each other again, but this time the silence had changed. It wasn't 2 strangers negotiating space. It was 2 suspects, sizing each other up. "I didn't touch your stuff," I repeated. "And I found something." I pulled the baby monitor out and set it on the table between us. Claire's face drained of color. "That wasn't here when I arrived," she whispered. Then, like a delayed reaction, her anger flared. "It's the host," she said. "He's watching. Or someone is." The storm hit the cabin hard enough that the window panes rattled. In that rattle we missed another sound, a softer one, until it was too late, a key turning in the deadbolt. The front door handle moved. Claire and I both froze, eyes snapping to the entry. The deadbolt clicked once, then again, like someone had the wrong key, then the right one. I heard my own heartbeat in my ears. "No," Claire mouthed. No. The door opened a few inches and stopped on the chain, which meant someone out there was trying to come in, quietly expecting it to just open. A man's voice slid through the gap low and calm. "Hey," he said, like he was stepping into his own home. "You shouldn't chain that." Claire grabbed the knife again. I raised the poker. "Who are you?" I shouted. The man didn't answer. He pushed the door gently, testing the chain like he was curious about its strength. "I'm just making sure everything's okay," he said, voice still mild. "Storm's nasty." Claire's hands shook, but her voice came out sharp. "We called you," she said. "Support, host, everybody." Nobody answered. The man sighed like we were being unreasonable. "Reception's bad up here," he said. "Open the door. I'll explain." I stepped closer and saw through the narrow gap a gloved hand holding a phone with its flashlight on, pointed inward, so it lit the chain and my face. He wanted to see who was there. He wanted to see how scared we were. Claire did something I'll never forget. She took the baby monitor, turned it back on, and held it up toward the door so the man could hear his own breathing echo back. The sound filled the cabin intimate and wrong. For a second, the man went silent. Then he chuckled softly, and the chuckle made my skin crawl because it wasn't surprised, it was amused. "Cute," he said. "Okay. Different plan." The pressure on the door increased. The chain screws groaned. I lunged and shoved the small entry table against the door, pinning it while Claire screamed, not words, just raw noise, meant to wake the mountain. The man outside stopped pushing. We heard him step back, boots crunching in the packed snow. Then his voice came again quieter, right against the gap. "You can't scream louder than the wind," he whispered. "And you can't drive out. So we'll do this when you're tired." Then he left the porch, and we heard nothing but the storm. Claire's eyes were wide and wet. "That's him," she said. "That's the host." "Maybe," I said. "Or someone with his key." We didn't sleep. We sat back to back on the living room floor, tools in our hands, watching the windows for movement in the white. At some point, the generator clicked on, and the Wi-Fi blinked alive for one thin miracle of a minute. My phone caught one bar. I didn't call anyone. I sent a message to the only number that might matter, 911, through the emergency text function my state had advertised once and I'd never used. 2 renters trapped. Intruder with key tried entry. Blizzard. No safe exit. The signal died immediately after. We waited. The night stretched. The cabin popped and sighed. At 4:12 Shushase A. M. Headlights swept across the snow outside like a searchlight, and we both flinched, expecting the worst. But the lights were yellow and slow, and the sound that followed was the most beautiful sound I've ever heard. The grind of a plow blade cutting a path. A truck stopped by the porch. Voices shouted. Claire and I ran to the window, waving like people being rescued from a sinking ship. On the porch in the new light, we finally saw what the storm had hidden footprints circling the cabin in tight loops over and over, like someone had paced there for hours, waiting for the moment we'd be too exhausted to hold the door. The deputy who came in with the plow driver didn't ask why we were paranoid. He saw the marks on the chain, the cracked screws, the baby monitor on the table, and his face hardened. When we told him the host's name from the listing, he looked away and said, "That's not who owns this property." Later, when daylight arrived and service returned fully, the rental listing had vanished. The host profile was gone, and the only proof we'd ever been there was the text I'd sent in that 1-bar minute, and the ring camera footage. The deputy pulled from his cruiser, showing a man on the porch in the storm smiling into the crack of the chain door like he'd finally found 2 people with nowhere else to go. The hitchhiker didn't wave for help the way normal people do. He stood perfectly still on the shoulder of the closed highway, facing my headlights like he'd been placed there. And when I slowed down, he smiled, before I even stopped, as if he already knew I would. The blizzard had turned the world into a tunnel of white, the kind of driving where you stare at the faint tracks in front of you and pray they belong to someone who survived. My GPS had given up 10 miles back. The state had issued a travel ban, but I tried anyway because my sister was in labor, and my family kept calling like the storm was a suggestion. Then my wipers started icing. My gas dropped faster than it should, and the road signs disappeared under snow. When I saw the man on the shoulder, my first thought was that he was going to die if I didn't stop. My second thought came too late. Sometimes people stand in storms because they want you to stop. I cracked the window an inch. Wind screamed through the gap and slapped snow into my face. "Are you okay?" I shouted. The man leaned closer, close enough that I saw his eyelashes crusted with ice and the skin around his mouth cracked, but his eyes were clear, focused, not panicked. "Car's dead," he said. "Battery. I just need to get out of the wind. I won't touch anything." He said it like a rehearsed pledge. I looked behind him for a car. In the whiteout, nothing. No hazard lights. No shape. "Where's your vehicle?" I asked. He shrugged slightly, like the question was less important than the cold. Down the shoulder, he said, "Can't see it now. Snow's covering it." That was possible. Everything was being covered. My hands tightened on the wheel. My heater struggled. My phone showed no service. And still I unlocked the passenger door because the human brain hates being the villain in its own story. He climbed in, and with the door shut, the cab felt instantly smaller, like the air had been divided. He smelled like wet wool and something sweet underneath, like cough syrup. He didn't shiver as much as he should have. He rubbed his hands once, then looked at my dashboard as if he was reading it. "Half a tank," he said casually. I stared at him. "What?" He nodded at the gauge. "Enough to idle, if we get stuck," he said. "You've got a charger." I didn't answer, right away. "Who are you?" I asked. "Evan," he said. "Thanks for stopping." His voice was calm, almost warm, and that calm made my skin prickle more than any desperation would have. I put the car back in drive and moved forward slowly, following the faint lines in the snow. Evan sat very still, hands folded, eyes forward. "You shouldn't be out," he said after a minute. "Travel ban." "I know," I said. "Family." He nodded like he understood then, asked, "Where are you headed?" I hesitated. "Toward Cedar Ridge," I said, naming the nearest town. Evan smiled slightly. "Good," he said. "That's where I need to go too." The word "to" landed like a weight. I tried to make it normal. "If your car is down there, we should call someone when we get service," I said. Evan's eyes flicked to my phone, mounted near the vent. "You won't get service out here," he said, not guessing, stating, "Not until you drop into the valley. And that's a while." He leaned back and exhaled, as if relaxing. "It's okay," he added. "We've got time." The storm thickened. Visibility shrank to the length of my hood. A semi-jackknifed up ahead, blocked by a drift. Its trailer, a dark wall. Flares burned red in the snow like little wounds. Cars were pulled over, engines idling, drivers slumped in seats. I slowed and stopped behind the last vehicle joining the line of stranded people. The radio hissed with static. Evan turned his head and looked at me for the first time with something like satisfaction. "There it is," he said softly. "Now we wait." "We can turn around," I said, though we both knew the word "can" was a lie. "Not safely," Evan said. He pointed out the windshield. "See the drifts. You'll get stuck in a ditch. Better to stay with the group." He sounded reasonable, helpful, but then he added quieter. "Better to stay where nobody can hear you over the wind." My stomach clenched. "What did you say?" I asked. Evan blinked, then smiled, like he'd been misunderstood on purpose. "I said you'll be safer here," he corrected smooth. "More people." He glanced at the line of cars. "But people get sleepy in storms. They don't watch." I locked my doors without making it obvious, thumb flicking the switch on the armrest. Evan watched the movement anyway. He didn't comment. He just rested his hand on the door handle for a second, casual as a passenger, and I felt my pulse jump because that handle was suddenly the most important object in the world. Minutes passed. Snow gathered on the windshield faster than my wipers could clear. The heater whined. The fuel gauge dropped in tiny, terrifying increments. In the car beside us, a woman got out and tried to talk to the driver in front of her, then retreated, shoulders hunched, defeated by the wind. Evan watched her like he was watching an animal. "You've got blankets?" he asked. I shook my head. Just my coat. Trunk might, he said. Road can't. I'm not getting out, I said. You will, he said, still calm, and that certainty in his voice made my throat go dry. I forced myself to keep my eyes on the road, on the other cars, on anything but his face. Why were you standing out there? I asked. Where exactly was your car? Evan sighed, like he was tired of being questioned. I told you, he said. Down the shoulder. Then he added almost gently, you ask a lot of questions for someone who stopped. I swallowed. People lie, I said. Evan smiled. Yes, he agreed. They do. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a pair of thin gloves. Not wet. Not icy. Dry. Clean. He slid them on carefully, fingertip by fingertip, like someone preparing. What are you doing? I asked. Warming up, he said. Hands get stiff and cold. Then he looked at my center console. You have a little knife in there, he asked, and my blood turned to ice, because I did have one. A small folding knife I kept for opening boxes. I'd never shown it. How would you know that? I asked. Evan's smile didn't change. Most people do, he said. Like most people have pepper spray on a keychain, or a bat in the trunk. It's cute. He leaned closer, voice dropping. But the storm makes people brave. They think they can do something dramatic, and then the storm reminds them they're just cold. I stared at the line of cars ahead, and felt the panic rising thick and fast. I needed witnesses. I needed light. I needed to get away from the sealed space of my own vehicle. I picked the one option that didn't require service. I laid on the horn. The sound was pathetic. At first muffled by snow, but it cut through the idling hush enough that heads turned in nearby cars. Evan flinched the first crack in his calm. His hand shot toward the steering wheel, as if to stop it. Then he caught himself, forcing the smile back on. Why are you doing that? He asked, voice sharper. I didn't stop. I kept the horn pressed until the driver behind me got out and trudged forward, bent against the wind, gesturing like, what is your problem? I cracked my window just enough to shout, He's not with me, I yelled, pointing at Evan. I picked him up, and he's. The wind stole half my words, but the fear in my voice did the rest. The driver's eyes narrowed, moving from me to Evan, then to the locked doors. Evan's smile turned brittle. He lifted his hands in a harmless shrug, playing the part. Ma'am's panicking, he said through the glass voice, loud and friendly. Storm's getting to her. The driver didn't look convinced. He stepped closer, peering in, and Evan's eyes hardened for a split second, calculating. That was all I needed. I shoved the door lock again, checked it, then grabbed my phone and slammed the emergency SOS button sequence I'd once practiced and forgotten. No service, it said, but a tiny icon flashed, attempting satellite. I didn't know if it would work. Evan saw the icon, and his calm finally broke. His hand grabbed my wrist hard enough to hurt. No, he hissed. Don't do that. The driver outside saw the motion and lunged toward the passenger door, yanking the handle. Locked. He pounded the glass. Hey, he shouted. More doors opened down the line. More faces appeared. Evan released my wrist and forced a laugh too late. Relax, he said, but now his eyes were scanning for exits. He reached for the passenger door lock, and I saw the glove tighten around it. I hit the horn again, and again, a frantic alarm. Someone else ran up. Someone filmed. Evan's shoulders tensed like a sprinter's. He shoved the door once failed, then did something that made my stomach drop. He smiled at me, soft and intimate, and said, Okay, another time like this was just a missed appointment. Then he opened my glove compartment with his free hand. He knew the latch and snatched out the road flare I'd forgotten was there. Before I could stop him, he cracked the passenger window an inch and shoved the flare through, snapping it to life outside where the wind wouldn't blow the smoke back into the car. The red light flared, bright, blinding, and for a heartbeat, everyone stepped back instinctively. Evan used that heartbeat. He slammed his shoulder into the passenger door, popped it open, just enough as someone outside fumbled with it, and dove into the snow, disappearing between cars like a shadow. People shouted. Someone chased for 5 steps and gave up, swallowed by white. When the state trooper finally reached the line in a high-clearance truck hours later, I told him everything. He asked for a description. I gave it. He nodded slowly, then said something that made my skin go cold all over again. We've had calls like this all winter. Same guy. Same story. He waits where the road closes, because people think stopping makes them good. The satellite SOS on my phone finally sent long after Evan vanished into the storm. It wasn't what saved me. Other people did. Witnesses did. The only thing the blizzard ever did was give him the perfect cover to stand still on a highway and smile like he already knew who would open the door. The pizza box was still warm when he refused to hand it to me, and that was the first moment I understood the blizzard wasn't the only thing keeping my front door closed. He kept one gloved hand on the box, like a leash, smiled through the porch light glare, and said, "My car's stuck. I can't leave. Let me warm up for 5 minutes." Behind him, the street was gone under drifting snow. The wind was loud enough to swallow traffic sounds, and the neighborhood looked abandoned. In that way, winter can make anything feel unclaimed. I hadn't even wanted pizza. I ordered it because the storm had started early. My power had been flickering all afternoon, and I figured one hot meal would make the night feel normal. The app said delivered 10 minutes before he arrived. Then the doorbell rang once polite, and I opened the door because I was still thinking like a person who believed timing meant safety. He stood too close to the threshold, shoulders angled slightly so he could see past me into my living room. His jacket had the right logo, and he wore a cap pulled low, but his boots were oddly clean for someone who'd walked through a foot of powder. "Sorry, roads are bad," he said, voice easy. "That'll be $22.40. I held my phone up with the confirmation. "It's paid," I said. He didn't blink. "System's down," he replied immediately, like he'd been waiting for that. "Card readers are out all over. Cash only." He said it with the calm certainty of someone presenting a fact, not negotiating. I should have closed the door right then. Instead, I said I don't have cash because I'm an idiot who still thought we were talking about pizza. His smile tightened. "Then let me come in and call my manager from your phone," he said. "Mine's dead." He lifted his own phone for half a second black screen, then lowered it again before I could really see. "No," I said. "You can stand there. I'll call." He exhaled a soft sound of annoyance, then flipped into concern, like it was a switch. "Ma'am, I'm not trying to be weird," he said. "My car slid into a drift down the block. If I go back out there, I'm not making it. Just 5 minutes. I'll sit by the door." The way he said "sit by the door" made my stomach twist, because it wasn't a request so much as a claim. I kept the chain on and tried to hand him the pizza through the narrow gap. He didn't let go. His eyes went to the chain, then to my face, then back to the chain like he was memorizing hardware. "You live alone?" he asked casually. My throat went dry. "No, I lead. My boyfriend's upstairs." He nodded slowly like he'd expected that answer. Then he did something small that made my skin go cold. He smiled wider and said, "Tell him." I said, "Hey." Like he was confident there was no boyfriend. The wind surged, and in the brief lull I heard a faint crunch behind him. Footsteps maybe, or just snow settling, but his head didn't turn. He wasn't worried about what was behind him. "Give me the box," I said sharper. He kept his hand on it, and leaned closer to the crack. "Let me use your bathroom," he said. "Then I'll go. I swear." The words were too quick, too rehearsed, like the bathroom wasn't the point at all, just the first step. "No," I repeated. "Drop it on the mat, and leave." For the first time, his smile slipped, showing something flat underneath. "You're making this hard," he said quietly, and that quiet tone carried more threat than shouting ever could. He set the box down finally, but not on the mat. He slid it forward so it crossed the threshold by an inch, as if he wanted to mark the line. Then he placed his boot against it, pinning it in place. "Listen," he said, voice friendly again. "Power's going out everywhere. If yours goes, you'll want another person here. Someone to help." He glanced into my house again, and I felt violated in a way that had nothing to do with weather. "I don't need help," I said. "Leave." He sighed, like I disappointed him. "Okay," he said, and stepped back from the porch. Relief hit me so hard I almost felt dizzy. I started to close the door. That's when he reached out and grabbed the edge of it with his glove, stopping it easily. "Wait," he said softly. "I forgot something." "Let go," I said. His eyes stayed on mine. "Open it," he replied, calm and certain. "You don't want to do this with the chain. Chains break." He said it the way someone talks about a rule of physics. I slammed the door hard and threw the deadbolt. My hands shook as I backed away. Through the wood I heard him laugh just once. Then his voice drifted through conversational, as if he was still a customer. "I'll be right here," he said, "until you calm down." Footsteps crunched across the porch, then stopped. Not leaving. Waiting. I turned off the living room lamp and crept to the side window. In the dim streetlight glow, I saw him standing in my driveway near my car, looking at it like it was his. Then he walked to my garage door and ran his gloved fingers along the bottom seal, testing for gaps. He wasn't cold. He was curious. I grabbed my phone and tried to call 911. No service. I tried the emergency text function. It spun and failed. I went to the kitchen and found the old corded phone I kept in a drawer for storms. Dead tone. That's when the power finally died, plunging the house into candlelight. The timing felt deliberate, like the storm had partnered with him. Outside, I heard a new sound, the metallic clack of my mailbox lid opening and closing. Then the scrape of something being dragged across my porch. I peeked through the peephole and saw the pizza box gone, replaced by a small shape on the mat. A flashlight pointed at my door from the outside, so the beam shone directly through the peephole, turning it into a bright white eye. He wanted to blind my view so I couldn't see what he was doing. From the other side of the door, his voice came again, softer, almost intimate. "I can hear you," he said. "You're breathing fast." My chest tightened. I stepped back quietly and moved toward the back door. It opened 2 inches and jammed against snow, packed like concrete. I shoved until my shoulder burned. Nothing. The storm had sealed every exit, except the one he controlled. I returned to the hallway and listened. The porch creaked. A faint metallic scrape touched the deadbolt, gentle, patient, like someone lining up a tool. I backed into the living room and grabbed the fireplace, poker hot, pounding so hard it felt loud enough for him to hear. Then the scraping stopped. Silence. The kind of silence that makes you lean forward because your brain hates not knowing. In that silence, I heard the faintest sound from inside my own house. The soft click of the mudroom door handle turning. Not the front door. The side door to the garage. The one with the keypad I never used because it stuck sometimes. A cold wave washed over me. He wasn't trying the front anymore. He'd found another way in. I moved toward the mudroom as quietly as I could, poker-raised candle in my other hand. The mudroom door was open a crack. Snow dust swirled on the floor like ash, and the keypad light on the wall glowed green. Someone had entered the code. I hadn't. I backed away, shaking, and that's when the house made a sound. I will never forget the faint creak of a floorboard in the hallway behind me, and a voice inside my house, no longer muffled by a door, saying calmly, "See, we can stop doing this." The scary way. I swung the poker at the air and ran toward the only place I could lock from the inside the bathroom. I slammed the door and turned the lock, then pressed my ear to it, trying to hear where he was. His footsteps moved slowly through my kitchen, then my living room, not rushing like he was touring. He tapped the wall once, then twice, the same neat rhythm, and said louder, "Now, you're okay. I'm just gonna sit down." The couch cushions compressed. He settled in like a guest. Then, he spoke into the dark, like he was talking to someone else. "Told you she'd open eventually," he said. My blood turned to ice. Someone else. Or was he just letting me imagine it? I clutched my phone and tried the SOS again and again, even as it failed because tapping the screen was the only thing keeping me from screaming. Minutes dragged. Then through the storm a distant engine growled. A heavy blade, scraping. A snowplow. Close. I banged on the bathroom wall with the poker and screamed until my throat tore. In the living room, the couch sprang back as he stood. His calm vanished. Footsteps moved fast now toward the mudroom. A door opened. Cold air surged. Then silence again except for the wind. When the plow finally turned into my streetlight sweeping, I ran barefoot to the front window and waved like a drowning person. The driver saw me, stopped, and radioed police. They found my garage side door standing open, keypad scratched as if it had been pressed too many times too quickly. The pizza had never been touched, and when an officer called the restaurant to confirm the delivery, the manager said something that made my knees go weak. No one had been sent to my address because they'd stopped deliveries hours earlier when the travel ban hit. The stranger at my door hadn't been a pizza guy who couldn't leave. He'd been a man who had finally found a storm loud enough to cover the sound of him getting in. The hotel lobby turned into a trap the moment the blackout hit, because the front doors locked with a heavy magnetic clunk. The emergency lights bled on in a sickly green, and the only person who seemed calm was the man who stepped behind the fuck. A front desk, like he belonged there. Outside, the blizzard erased the street. The revolving door froze mid-turn, and every phone on the lobby tables became a useless rectangle of glass. I had checked into the hotel off the interstate because the state shut the highway down and my rental car was starting to fishtail in drifts. It wasn't a fancy place, but it was warm and it smelled like bleach and coffee, and the clerk smiled, like this was all routine. Just for one night, I told myself, wait out the storm. By 9:30 p.m. The power flickered. By 9:31 everything died. The TV above the bar snapped to black. The elevators sighed and stopped. Somewhere in the building, a door alarm chirped once, and then fell silent. The lobby lights came back, as thin strips along the baseboards and a few ceiling fixtures that hummed weakly, making everyone's faces look tired and wrong. A cluster of us drifted toward the front desk. 2 couples, an older man with a cane, a teenage kid in a hoodie, and me. The clerk, a young woman with a tight ponytail, picked up the desk phone and frowned at the dead line. Backup generator should kick in, she said, trying to sound confident. Sometimes it takes a minute. That's when the man in the wool coat stepped forward. He was tall, neat, mid-40s, maybe with a traveler's bag and an expression like he'd been waiting to be useful. I can help, he said. I travel a lot. These systems. He gestured vaguely, like he understood everything. The clerk looked relieved, and that relief made my stomach tighten, because predators love relief. Do you work maintenance? She asked. Security, he said smoothly. Different property. Same idea. He stepped behind the desk without being invited, and started opening drawers as if he already knew where things were. The clerk hesitated, then let him. Everyone else did too, because in a blackout, people cling to anyone who acts like they have a plan. Okay, he said, tapping the counter like a meeting chair. First thing, we don't want people wandering. Stairs are dark. Elevators are dead. We keep everyone here until power returns. He pointed toward the lobby seating. Stay visible. Stay together. It sounded reasonable. That's what made it work. The clerk nodded and looked at him like he'd saved her. What about calling the utility company? I asked. He looked at me for the first time, and his smile was pleasant but too sharp. Cell towers go down in storms, he said, and landlines in these places are usually internet-based. No power, no line. He said it like a fact you couldn't argue. Then he added softer, you don't want to waste battery anyway. He reached toward the charging station by the desk and unplugged it with a casual tug as if wasting battery was now his jurisdiction. I watched the clerk's face. She didn't like it, but she didn't stop him. She was young, alone, and suddenly taking orders from a stranger because he sounded official. 10 minutes passed. 20. The wind battered the glass doors. Snow piled against them. Someone asked about keys. The man in the wool coat, he introduced himself as. Alan held up a ring of master keys he'd pulled from a drawer. I'll do room checks, he said. Make sure everyone's okay. The clerk blinked. We don't usually. In emergencies you do. Alan cut in gently and smiled at the group like he was reassuring children. No one's in trouble. We just need to know if anyone's stuck. He turned and started toward the hallway. The clerk started to follow, then stopped, as if unsure whether she was allowed to leave the desk. I stepped forward. "I'll go with you," I said. Alan paused and looked at me like I'd spoken out of turn. "No need," he said. "Stay with the group." "I want to," I insisted. "For safety." The word safety made his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly, like I'd touched a nerve. He forced the smile back on. "All right," he said, "if it makes you feel better." He walked toward the corridor that led to the rooms, and I followed at a distance, not close enough for him to grab me quickly, not far enough for him to corner me alone. The hallway was dim, lit only by those weak green strips. The carpet swallowed sound. Doors looked identical, which meant confusion was easy. Alan moved with confidence anyway, counting doors in his head, selecting one without checking a list, tapping, then sliding the master key in when nobody answered. "This is against policy," I said quietly. He didn't look back. "Policy doesn't matter in a storm," he replied. The key turned. The door opened. The room was empty, bed neatly made. Alan stepped inside, looked around, and then did something chillingly casual. He closed the door most of the way, leaving me in the hallway alone for half a second, like he was testing whether I'd panic. I shoved the door back open immediately. Alan stared at me for a beat, then chuckled. "Alert," he said. "Good." We moved on. At the third door, a woman answered in a robe, confused and angry. Alan smiled, warmly. "Power issue," he said. "Just checking you're okay." The woman nodded, irritated but reassured. Then Alan's gaze dropped to the door latch, and he asked, conversationally, "Traveling alone?" The woman hesitated. "My husband's asleep," she lied, and the lie came out too fast. Alan smiled a little wider, like he collected those. He nodded and stepped back, and we continued. When we returned to the lobby, something had changed. The clerk was no longer behind the desk. The teenage kid was gone. One of the couples whispered that someone had tried the front doors and couldn't open them. Alan took the keys and walked to the doors, tested them once, and nodded gravely. "Mag locks," he announced. "They're engaged." He didn't sound surprised. He sounded satisfied. "We need to stay calm," he added, and then he looked directly at me. "No hero stuff." Agreed. My skin prickled. "Where's the clerk?" I asked. Alan didn't answer right away. "She's checking the basement electrical room," he said finally. I told her too. "She'll be back." The sentence felt wrong. You don't tell a lone young clerk to go into a basement during a blackout, unless you want her out of the lobby. "I'll go get her," I said, already moving. Alan's hand shot out and grabbed my wrist hard enough to make pain bloom. He leaned in, still smiling so the others wouldn't notice, and whispered, "Sit down." I yanked my arm free and raised my voice just enough for the group to hear. "Don't touch me," I said. Alan's smile froze. For a second his eyes went flat, calculating. Then he lifted both hands in a harmless gesture, playing the role again. "Sorry," he said loudly. "Just trying to keep everyone together. Storm makes people jumpy." I didn't sit. I walked toward the staff-only door behind the desk that led to the service hall because even in dim light, I'd seen the exit sign glowing above it. The door had a keypad. Alan's eyes followed me. "That's restricted," he said. "It leads to the loading bay. It's dangerous." "So is being locked in a lobby," I said. I pressed the handle. It opened. The service corridor smelled like detergent and damp concrete. At the far end, a red pull station glowed faintly. I ran to it and yanked. The fire alarm exploded through the hotel, louder than the storm strobes, flashing white and red like a heartbeat. In the lobby, people shouted, startled into motion. Alan swore under his breath, one sharp word that didn't match his calm, and then he moved fast, not towards safety, but toward the front desk computer, as if he needed to do something before the noise brought help. I didn't give him time. I sprinted deeper into the service hall and found the stairwell door, heavy, industrial, and not controlled by a keypad. It opened, and cold air rushed up from below. I ran down into the basement level, calling for the clerk. "Hello." My voice echoed off concrete. Then faintly, I heard a muffled sound from behind a laundry room door, a knock, 3 taps. the same neat rhythm that felt like Alan's signature. I yanked the door open and found the clerk crouched inside, eyes wide, a phone in her hand like a useless stone. "He told me to come down here," she whispered. Then he locked the door. We ran back up together, the alarm still screaming. In the lobby, 2 guests had forced the front doors enough for a crack of air to come in, but the snow was piled high outside like a wall. Through that crack, though, we heard the sweetest sound of the night, distant sirens, muted but real, coming closer. Alan stood near the bar, now hands in his pockets, watching the chaos like he was waiting for the right moment to disappear. When he saw the clerk beside me, his face tightened. He smiled at her. "There you are," he said warmly. "See, all fine." The clerk stared at him, then shook her head, voice shaking but loud. "That man is not staff," she said. He locked me in the basement. The room went silent for one thin second, and in that second Alan's smile vanished completely. He looked around at the guests, at the phones, filming, at the alarm strobes, at the doors that wouldn't open, and he made a decision. He bolted toward the service corridor, not the lobby doors, not the front, the back. He knew the building. He knew the exits, which meant he'd never been just a stranded guest. A state trooper arrived minutes later in a high-clearance truck and forced the doors with a pry bar while the wind tried to fight him. People spilled into the cold like they were escaping a sinking ship. I pointed at Alan as he slipped into the service hall. The trooper chased boots, pounding, radio, crackling. They caught him near the loading bay, trying to open a maintenance cage where spare keycards hung on hooks. His name wasn't Alan. He didn't work. Security. The hotel manager arrived at dawn, pale and furious, and told police the truth. Their former overnight security supervisor had been fired months ago for policy violations and never returned his master key. In the end, the blackout wasn't what made that lobby dangerous. The blackout just gave a man with access the perfect moment to put on authority, like a coat, and wait for tired strangers to obey. The footsteps began at 203A, slow and deliberate above my bedroom ceiling, and what scared me most was how perfectly they timed themselves with the storm. The wind would surge and hide them, then lull just long enough for the next step to land like a message. I lived alone in the lower unit of a lake house, converted into 2 apartments, and the upper unit had been empty since October. No tenant, no furniture, no reason for anyone to be walking up there in the middle of a blizzard. The county alerts had been screaming all day. Travel ban, stay indoors, plows suspended until daylight. Around midnight the power returned for 10 minutes, long enough to trick my nervous system into relaxing, then snapped off again with a hard click that sounded like a door shutting. I lay in bed listening to the ice tick on the windows and the building settle. The first sound I heard upstairs could have been a thermal pop one board complaining about the cold. I almost believed it. Then it happened again, heel toe, moving from the front of the upstairs unit to the back, a steady pace like someone walking a hallway they knew. I sat up so fast the candle flame bent. The steps stopped. 10 seconds passed. Then they resumed slower now, and I realized they were pausing when I shifted on the mattress, like they could hear the bed springs. A new sound followed, faint but unmistakable, a chair, legs scraping across wood. Then a soft thump, like something set down carefully. My brain pictured someone unpacking, making themselves comfortable, not rushing. That image terrified me more than the steps. If it was just a trespasser seeking warmth, they would have made noise, banged on a door, shouted for help. This felt private, intentional. There was a shared mudroom at the front of the house, with a single exterior door and 2 interior doors, one to my unit, one to the stairs up. I opened my door into the mudroom, and cold air hit my face like a slap. I used my phone screen as a weak flashlight and looked down at the bottom step. Fresh snow had been tracked onto it, in a bright, wet smear. I'd cleaned those steps earlier with my boot because the owner hated salt indoors. That smear was new. The prints were wide and deep, and they went up. I climbed 2 steps, not because I was brave, but because my brain demanded proof. The upstairs door was cracked open by an inch. The gap was black. Warm air leaked out, faintly smelling of dust and old carpet. I didn't touch the knob. I just listened. Inside, a floorboard creaked softly, and then a whisper came through the gap, quiet and flat, downstairs. Not a question, an acknowledgement like someone had checked a list and found my name on it. I backed down too fast and nearly slipped on the wet snow. I locked myself in my unit again and killed every candle except one, keeping the flame low. I sat on my kitchen floor with the poker across my lap and stared at the ceiling. Above me, the footsteps returned, crossing slowly, then stopping, then crossing again as if someone was mapping the rooms by sound. Once I heard a soft cough. Once I heard the upstairs toilet flush, followed by the sink running for a long time. Water left on, as if the person wanted me to hear proof of life. I tried my phone because admitting the truth out loud felt safer than sitting with it, but every call failed instantly, as if the line died before it could even ring. I texted my sister, a single sentence. Someone is upstairs, and watched it sit unsent. The emergency text feature spun and quit. The Wi-Fi router remained dead. I checked every window in my unit, then shoved a chair under the back door handle, even though the back door was drifted shut from the outside. A minute later from the mudroom I heard the staircase creak. One step, then the next, then the next. Descending slowly, each tread complaining under weight. The sound stopped at the bottom like a pause for listening, and then came a soft metallic click, the sound of my interior doorknob turning from the outside. Not a violent twist. A careful test, the way you test whether someone remembered to lock up. The knob returned to center. Then it turned again slower, and something lightly brushed the bottom of the door, a scrape like a glove, tracing the seal. A voice came through the wood, amused and close. Locked. Good. Then the steps moved away from my door and climbed the stairs again, unhurried, like they'd only come down to make sure I understood the rules. After that, the worst part was how normal it sounded. The upstairs floorboards creaked the way they would if someone was simply living there. A careful walk to the kitchen, a drawer sliding, a cabinet closing, a soft thump like a bag set down. Hours passed in a slow blur of listening and trying not to make noise. I dozed in short, ugly bursts, waking every time the ceiling sighed. At one point the steps came down the upstairs hallway and stopped directly above my bedroom, and in that stillness I felt irrationally, but completely, that the person was standing there with their ear to the floor listening for my breathing. I gripped the poker until my hand cramped. Then the steps drifted away again. No rush. No mistake. Just before dawn, the storm finally thinned enough for new sounds to break through the distant grind of a plow blade and the low engine of a truck forcing its way down the lakeside road. I ran to the window and waved like a drowning person. The plow stopped, and the driver, bundled in a reflective jacket, followed me to the shared mudroom while I tried to explain with a shaking voice. He radioed a deputy, who arrived 10 minutes later. Boots crunching on newly packed snow, flashlight cutting hard lines through the dim. On the stairs, the one-way footprints were clearer in daylight. Up, no matching prints down. The upstairs door was still cracked. The deputy pushed it open and swept the unit. A battery lantern sat on the floor, glowing faintly. A sleeping bag lay unzipped near the living room wall. 2 empty soup cans and a plastic water bottle were lined up neatly beside it, like someone had organized their night. On the coffee table, a small spiral notebook was open to a single sentence in blocky handwriting. Too loud downstairs. Try again. The deputy checked closets, the bathroom, even the attic hatch in the hallway ceiling. No one. In the bedroom, though, the window latch was flipped, and the sash was lifted just enough to let the cold in. Outside, the snow on the roof was disturbed in a narrow path leading toward the back edge, where a ladder leaned against the siding placed there, in a way that made it look less like maintenance and more like an exit plan. The deputy told me storms drive people to desperate choices, and that they'd searched the area, but I barely heard him. I kept staring at the one-way footprints on the stairs, because the blizzard hadn't trapped a stranger in the house with me. It had given them hours of noise to cover their movement, darkness to hide their waiting, and a world outside so hostile I couldn't risk leaving until they decided they were done. I didn't notice the first missing can until the second night of the blizzard, when the cabin's power died, My phone lost service, and I started rationing like I was stranded on an island instead of a vacation rental 30 miles from the Moundestoo, nearest town. I had unpacked the groceries the way I always do. Neat rows, labels facing out, because organization makes me feel in control. And I was certain I'd bought enough to last. Soup, chili, pasta, oatmeal, granola bars, coffee, batteries, and a small bottle of lighter fluid for the fireplace. The storm had started as pretty snow and turned into a wall of white by afternoon. The gravel road up to the cabin disappeared under drifts. The host messaged once. Road usually gets plowed by morning, then my reply failed to send a little grey spinning icon that never turned into a check mark. The second night is when it stopped feeling like weather and started feeling like someone else. I cooked 1 can of soup, ate slowly, and set the empty can in the trash. Then I opened the pantry and stared at an empty space where the second can should have been. I stood there longer than I want to admit, waiting for my memory to correct itself. Maybe I'd used it earlier. Maybe I'd put it somewhere else. I checked the counter, the sink, my bag, the trash. Nothing. I told myself I miscounted, because cabin fever starts with small lies you tell yourself so you don't have to face bigger ones. The next morning, the granola bar box felt lighter. 2 bars missing. I still tried to explain it away. Stress. Bad light. My own absent-mindedness. But by the 3rd night, the pattern was undeniable. My spare flashlight batteries were gone, then the instant oatmeal packets, then the lighter fluid. Whoever it was didn't take big things. They took the things that made the cabin livable. They took them slowly, like they wanted me to doubt my own sanity before I ran out of options. I made an inventory list on a scrap of paper and taped it to the fridge. Every time I ate something, I marked it. Every time I checked the pantry, I counted. The list didn't calm me. It made the theft obvious. On the 4th night, I set a trap that made me feel ridiculous until I woke up and it wasn't. I poured a thin line of flour across the pantry threshold and another line across the living room doorway. I wedged a metal spoon into the pantry hinge so it would clatter if the door moved. Then I sat by the fire with the poker in my lap, watching the hallway fighting sleep. At some point the flames hypnotized me and my head dipped forward. When I woke, the fire had burned low and my mouth tasted like smoke. The spoon was on the floor. The flour line at the pantry had been disturbed in a single smooth smear, as if a socked foot had stepped through and dragged slightly. The living room line was also broken, but not by a footprint. It looked like something low had slid across it. White dust streaked the floor in a straight, careful path toward the kitchen. I checked the pantry. Another can gone. The instant coffee gone. Then I reached for my coat on the chair by the door and my stomach dropped again. My car keys were missing. That was the moment fear stopped being abstract. I tried to call 911. No service. I tried emergency text. It spun and failed. I cracked the front door and stared into solid white. The drift was chest high, the kind you can't push through without getting buried. The storm shoved snow into the gap and forced me to shut the door. I started hunting for where they were hiding. Closets, under the bed, behind the shower curtain. Every time I turned my back on a dark corner, my skin crawled. I found nothing until I opened the utility closet and noticed the vent cover near the floor wasn't fully screwed in. One corner was lifted just enough for a fingernail. I pulled the vent cover free. Behind it was a crawlspace, opening black and low-smelling like wet wood. The cabin sat on a raised foundation, and the space under it ran like a tunnel. I shone my phone light inside and saw insulation pipes and a line of flattened cardboard, like someone had crawled there often enough to make a path. Farther back, beyond the reach of my light, something reflected metal maybe. I held my breath. In the silence between wind gusts, I heard a sound that didn't belong to the house. A slow exhale controlled, like someone trying not to be heard. I slammed the vent cover back on and backed away, heart pounding hard enough to make me dizzy. I didn't know if the person had been under the cabin the whole time or if they'd crawled there after I arrived, but either option made me sick. They could hear me. They could wait. They could come out when I slept. I kept the fireplace roaring, because light felt like a weapon. I slept in my boots with the poker beside me and woke at every tiny crack in the wood. At some point before morning, I heard a soft tap from the kitchen side like knuckles against the inside of a cabinet. One tap, then another, spaced out and calm. I didn't answer. I didn't move. A voice drifted through the vent cover so quietly I almost convinced myself it was wind. Don't waste it. I sat frozen, listening to the fire snap, realizing the most terrifying part wasn't that I was trapped. It was that someone else was trapped with me, and had decided the cabin belonged to both of us. When the sky finally began to gray, I decided I would rather die in the storm than stay inside. I wrapped my face in a scarf, grabbed my coat, and went to the front door. The wind had eased just enough to work. I kicked and shoved snow until I carved a narrow trench. It took forever and burned every muscle in my arms, but fear makes you stubborn. When I finally forced the door open wide enough to squeeze through, I heard movement behind me, soft, quick, inside the kitchen, and I felt the certainty of eyes on my back. A low engine growled through the white, closer than I expected. A plow's lights appeared like two dull suns. I screamed and waved until the driver stopped and climbed down. When I choked out what was happening, he radioed a deputy, and they went straight to the cabin with a flashlight and a hand near a holster. I stood in the road, shaking so hard I could barely stay upright, watching them disappear into the white. They came back out a few minutes later with a look that told me I hadn't imagined any of it. They pulled the vent cover off and shone a light into the crawlspace. My missing food was stacked neatly on flattened cardboard. My car key sat on top like a prize. A sleeping bag was pushed against the foundation wall, and beside it was a small notebook with my own inventory list, copied in careful handwriting, every box checked, except the last line where 2 words had been added in tight print: shared, supplies. The deputy asked if I'd seen anyone, if I'd heard a vehicle, if I'd noticed footsteps outside. I just stared at the notebook, because the handwriting was careful, almost polite, and that made it worse. In the end, they didn't find the person under the cabin, only the proof that someone had been there with me the entire time, choosing when to take, choosing when to speak, choosing when to disappear into the storm. That's the part that still wakes me up at night. Storms don't just trap victims inside. They also give strangers 1,000 quiet ways to leave. I didn't realize the phone line had been cut until I finally heard the dial tone die in the middle of a call, like someone out in the storm had pinched the last thread, connecting me to the outside world, and then listened to see if I noticed. The blizzard had already buried the road and knocked out my cell service hours earlier, so the old landline in the rental farmhouse had become my one comfort object, the one thing that made the isolation feel temporary. The host had laughed in his message. Old school phone still works when towers don't, and I believed him because I wanted to. The first night the wind came in hard and steady, rattling the window frames and pushing snow against the doors until the house sounded like it was being slowly wrapped in cotton. I kept the fireplace going, lit candles, and tried not to spiral. Around 1:14 p.m., the power flickered and went out. The farmhouse didn't go fully dark because the snow outside reflected moonlight, turning everything a pale gray. I picked up the corded phone and called my sister, half expecting it to fail. It rang. Hearing that ring made my shoulders drop with relief. She answered on the 3rd ring groggy, and I started talking too fast, explaining the outage, the storm, the road. She told me to stay put and promised to call again in the morning. For a moment, I felt normal. For a moment, I forgot the way the wind makes an empty place feel watched. After I hung up, I noticed the weirdest thing: the front porch light was on, even though the power was out. It wasn't bright, just a steady, dull glow through the storm like a small eye refusing to close. I told myself it was solar, or a battery backup, or my brain misunderstanding shadows. Then I heard a sound from the mudroom, soft and slow, the scrape of a boot on the rubber mat. I froze. The farmhouse had a tiny enclosed entryway with the exterior door, and beyond it, the interior door to the kitchen. I held my breath and listened. Another scrape, then nothing. I didn't walk to the door. I didn't call out. I just stood there, candle trembling in my hand, letting the silence stretch until it felt like a dare. When I finally approached the mudroom door, the handle was exactly where I'd left it, The deadbolt front chain latched. No signs of force. No footprints I could see through the frosted glass. I went back to the living room and told myself I'd imagined it, because the brain will do anything to protect itself from admitting it's trapped. The second sign came an hour later, when I heard the faintest vibration from the phone base, an almost inaudible click, as if someone had lifted and replaced the receiver somewhere else in the house. I stared at it, confused. The line was quiet, but the click stayed in my ears. I picked up the receiver. Dial tone. Still there. Still alive. I put it back down and moved a chair under the back door handle, even though the back door was jammed by snow. Then I took the poker from the fireplace and sat where I could see both doors in the hallway. Cabin fever isn't instant. It's a slow narrowing of your world until every sound inside it becomes a clue. A doi scheiß prezeche. The phone rang once. Just once. Not a full ring. A single sharp chirp that made my blood jump. I grabbed the receiver and pressed it to my ear. Nothing. No dial tone. No static. Just a dead, empty silence, like the line had been swallowed. I hung up and tried again. Dead. I stared at the phone, then at the wall jack behind the side table. I traced the cord with my eyes like it might explain itself. My chest tightened and I forced myself to move to do something practical because practical is the only antidote to panic. In the kitchen, I found the breaker panel and checked it, even though I knew a breaker wouldn't kill a landline. Everything looked normal. I went to the mudroom and checked the exterior door again. Locked. Chain. Deadbolt. Still no forced entry. The porch light glowed through the storm, like it was mocking me. I tried my cell phone again. No service. I tried the emergency text feature. It spun and failed. Then I did the only thing left. I put on my boots and coat and stepped into the mudroom with the poker in my hand, intending to crack the exterior door and look outside for a downed line. The moment my fingers touched the deadbolt, a soft knock came from the other side of the door. Not banging, not frantic. Just two neat taps, then a pause, then two more, like a rhythm someone used to signal that they were there. I backed away from the door, so fast, my shoulder hit the wall. The knocks stopped. Then a voice came through the wood, low and calm, close enough that I could hear breath between words. Phone's not going to help you. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat had locked. The voice continued, still calm, as if we were having a normal conversation. You can stop trying it, said. It's quiet out here. Nobody's coming. I stood perfectly still, poker raised, staring at the doorknob like it might turn itself. Then the voice sighed, almost disappointed, and the footsteps moved away across the porch, crunching, softly deliberate. I waited for the sound to fade, but the wind made everything uncertain. I listened until my ears hurt. Then I did something I hated myself for doing. I opened the door. Not all the way. Just a crack chain, still on enough for cold air to punch into the mudroom and fill it with stinging snow. The porch was empty. The only movement was the blizzard. I leaned forward and looked down at the steps. Fresh prints were there, deep and sharp, leading up to the door, and then turning away, circling the porch once, like the person had paced while they spoke. The prints didn't go toward the road. They went toward the side of the house, where the utility meter and the phone line ran under the eaves. I shut the door and locked it again, hands shaking. I didn't want to go outside, but the idea of someone being close enough to cut my line and then whisper through my door was worse than the cold. I grabbed my flashlight, wedged the poker in my elbow, and forced the back door open with my shoulder until snow spilled in like powdery sand. The yard was a white blur. The wind shoved at me immediately, trying to push me back inside. I kept low and moved along the wall, one hand sliding over the siding so I wouldn't lose the house in the white. When I reached the side where the phone line should have been, I saw the cable hanging loose, the end frayed and snapped, and beneath it a clean-cut mark on the sheath, too precise to be storm damage. The line hadn't broken. Someone had cut it. My breath came out in short fog, bursts loud in my ears. I scanned the yard flashlight beam slicing through snow, and for a second I thought I saw a shape near the tree line. Something darker than the storm standing still. I swung the light. Nothing but white. but the feeling stayed the certainty of eyes on me. I stumbled back toward the house, boots sinking, fighting the wind. Halfway, the porch light blinked once and went out. Not because the storm changed, because someone decided it should. In the darkness, a new sound came from inside the farmhouse, the soft creak of a floorboard in the hallway, followed by the slow, deliberate click of my kitchen drawer opening. I froze in the yard, snow blasting my face, realizing the worst truth too late. Cutting the phone line wasn't just to keep me from calling for help. It was to make sure I wouldn't hear the call connect while someone was already inside my house, moving through my life as quietly as the storm. I woke up because the fire had changed, not because of a noise, but because the crackle had softened into a low, steady hiss, the sound it makes when someone has just added fresh wood and stepped back to watch it catch. For a second I stayed still under the blanket, on the couch, letting my half-asleep brain collect the room. The dim orange glow, the smell of smoke, the wind pressing against the windows. Then my eyes adjusted and I saw the shape sitting in the armchair across from me, perfectly still, hands clasped, face turned toward the fire like it belonged there. The chair hadn't been facing the couch when I fell asleep. I had angled it toward the window earlier, a nervous habit so I could see the door's reflection in the glass. Now it faced me, and the person in it wasn't a shadow. He was a man, maybe mid-30s, wearing a dark beanie and a heavy coat, dusted with snow that was already melting into the fabric. He wasn't shivering. He wasn't breathing hard. He looked comfortable, like the warmth was for him. I tried to move, but my body didn't obey immediately. Fear does that, turns you into a statue while your mind screams. The man's gaze shifted from the fire to my face, slow and deliberate like he'd been waiting for my eyes to open. He smiled, small and controlled, and in that smile, I recognized the worst possible thing, familiarity. Not that I knew him, but that he knew the situation. He knew I was trapped. He knew I'd wake, eventually. "Don't get up," he said quietly, voice calm enough to sound almost kind. "You'll slip." Outside, the blizzard hammered the cabin and made the world beyond the frosted glass look like static. My phone sat on the coffee table dead, on one bar, no service. The front door was chained. The back door was jammed by snow. I'd checked every window earlier and found them frozen shut. I'd told myself the cabin was secure, that the storm was the only threat. And now a stranger was sitting between me and the only exit, watching me wake up, like it was part of the plan. I forced my voice out anyway. "Who are you?" My throat was dry, and the words came out thin. The man glanced at the poker I'd left near the fireplace earlier. It wasn't where I left it either. It lay across the hearth, closer to him than to me, like he'd moved it while I slept. "I'm someone who didn't want to freeze," he said. "Same as you." His eyes flicked over my face, my hands, my posture, reading me. "You can stop pretending you're tougher than you are," he added, still soft. "It's just the two of us." I sat up slowly, keeping the blanket around my shoulders like it could protect me. "How did you get in?" I asked. The man shrugged once small, as if the details were boring. "Door," he said. "You'd be surprised what people forget when they're tired." I knew I hadn't forgotten. I'd thrown the deadbolt and latched the chain and even jammed a chair under the knob because fear had made me thorough. His answer wasn't meant to explain. It was meant to make me doubt. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on knees, the firelight cutting hard lines across his face. "You sleep light," he said. "That's good. Most people don't." My stomach dropped. He hadn't just arrived. He'd been in the cabin while I slept, watching, listening, learning. The thought made my skin crawl. I glanced toward the front door. The chain hung slack. The deadbolt was unlocked. Not broken. Unlocked as if someone had taken their time with it. "I can leave," I said, even though the sentence was a lie. "Plows will come in the morning." The man smiled, again. "Plows don't come up here until the wind drops," he said. "And the wind drops when it wants." He nodded toward the window. "You hear it? It's loud. It covers a lot." He said it like an appreciation, like he admired the storm. I kept my eyes on his hands. They were bare, not red, from cold not cracked. Clean nails. a faint ring of soot on one fingertip like he'd just handled firewood. "Did you add wood?" I asked. His eyes brightened slightly, pleased that I'd noticed. "You were getting cold," he said, as if he'd done me a favor. Then he tilted his head and asked, "Do you have food?" The question was casual, but it landed like a threat. "Yes," I lied. "Enough." He nodded, as if he already knew the truth. "You don't," he said. "You packed like this was a cute weekend?" Storms make weekends into weeks. He stood slowly, and every muscle in my body tightened. He wasn't tall, but he moved with the confidence of someone who didn't fear consequences. He walked to the kitchen without asking, opened a cabinet, and pulled out a mug, like he knew exactly where it was. Then he opened my pantry bag on the counter, the one I'd tied shut, and began to look through it with calm curiosity. "You're not leaving," I said, voice shaking now. He didn't look back. "I can," he said. "You can't." He said it gently, like it was a difference in ability, not morality. I slid my hand under the blanket and felt for my phone. The man glanced over his shoulder as if he'd heard the movement. "No service," he reminded me, "but you can try. It's cute when people try." He set the mug down and walked back toward the living room. When he passed the fireplace, he picked up the poker with 2 fingers like it was dirty and set it on top of the mantel high enough that I couldn't grab it quickly. The casualness of that motion almost broke me. It wasn't rage, it was control. He returned to the chair and sat again, crossing one ankle over the other, as if he had all night. "Here's what's going to happen," he said softly. "We're going to be reasonable. You're going to share the heat. I'm going to share the storm. And in the morning, if the road's open, we'll see." The word we made my stomach turn. "I'm not sharing anything," I whispered. The man's smile faded slightly, not into anger, but into patience. "You will when you're hungry," he said. "Or tired. Or cold." He gestured toward the couch. "Lie back down. You need sleep." I shook my head, and he watched me for a long beat as if deciding whether tonight required force. Then he stood again and walked to the hallway. The cabin had one small bedroom and a bathroom beyond it. He stopped at the bedroom door and looked back at me, almost politely. "Stay here," he said. "If you follow me, you'll regret it." Then he went into the bedroom and closed the door, not all the way, leaving it slightly ajar like he wanted me to hear him moving inside. I sat frozen on the couch, listening to drawers open softly. A suitcase, zipper slide the faint clink of something metal set on the nightstand. He was making himself comfortable. He was settling in. That was worse than a quick attack, because it meant he believed time belonged to him. I forced myself to move quietly, inch by inch, toward the front door. I didn't run. Running makes noise. A noise in a cabin is like shouting your location. I reached the door and touched the deadbolt. It was unlocked. My hand shook so badly the knob clicked against the plate. From the bedroom, the man's voice came immediately calm and close, as if he'd been standing behind the door the whole time. "That's loud," he said. "You'll wake the storm." My chest tightened. He knew every sound I made. He wanted me to know he knew. I stopped moving, holding my breath. The silence stretched. Then from the bedroom he added, almost kindly, "Go back to the couch. I don't want to chase you in here." I stared at the door, at the white beyond it, at the chain, hanging useless. I thought about opening it anyway, about throwing myself into the blizzard barefoot if I had to, because cold outside felt less terrifying than a man inside who watched me sleep. Then, through the wind, I heard something distant and heavy, an engine. Not close, but real. A plow blade scraping far down the road, a sound that didn't belong to the storm. Hope hit so hard, it felt like pain. I didn't answer the man. I didn't move toward him. I moved toward the window instead, and pressed my face to the glass, searching the white. A faint yellow glow appeared, then vanished, and appeared again as the vehicle turned. The man must have seen it too, because the bedroom door opened wider, and he stepped into the hallway, posture different, now alert and irritated. The polite calm slipped for the first time. "No," he said, under his breath, like the storm had betrayed him. I seized the moment and screamed one long raw sound, and pounded on the window with both fists until my knuckles burned. The man lunged toward me, but the scream had already done its job. Outside, the yellow light paused, then swung toward the cabin. Headlights stabbed through the white. The stranger stopped in place, calculating, and in that calculation, I saw the truth. He wasn't trapped. He was choosing. He backed toward the bedroom, moving fast, but quiet, and in 2 seconds he was gone, slipping into whatever exit he'd used to get in. Maybe the back window, maybe the crawl space, maybe a door. I'd never even checked because I didn't want to. Believe. When the plow driver finally reached my porch and banged on the door, I ripped it open and practically fell into his arms, sobbing words that didn't make sense. He stepped inside, eyes scanning, and his expression tightened when he saw the fireplace poker on the mantel, and the chair turned to face the couch like an audience seat. The cabin looked normal, except for one thing on the coffee table, my phone placed neatly on top of the blanket I'd been sleeping under screen, facing up as if someone had wanted to leave a message without writing it. The message was simple, and it wasn't meant for police or paperwork. It was meant for me. It said, I was here the whole time. The first time I saw the figure in the blizzard, I thought it was a mailbox. Then it raised its arm. I was alone in a rental cabin on a lake road. The county had closed by dusk. The power had died before midnight, and my phone had been stuck on no service long enough that I'd stopped checking like it was a bad habit. Snow hit the windows sideways, a constant hiss that made the world feel smaller than the room I was trapped in. I kept the fireplace going, not just for heat, but for the comfort of the light, because darkness in a storm feels like an invitation. Around 1:20 a.m., I went to the kitchen for water, and in a brief lull heard the faintest tap against the glass, not from inside, but from outside, like a knuckle testing a window. I wiped a circle clear in the frost, and saw the porch light catch something upright near the end of the driveway, a human shape, too still to be drifting snow, standing where the road should have been. It didn't wave for help. It faced the cabin, letting the storm coat it, and when the wind shifted, I saw a pale oval where a face should have been. Then it pointed not at the house in general, but directly at my window as if it could see me behind the glass. For a few seconds, I honestly considered opening the door. Cabin fever does that. It turns basic decency into a lever someone else can pull. I even took one step toward the entry before my brain caught up and reminded me of the travel ban, the dead service, and the fact that nobody in real trouble stands perfectly still. I killed the lamp beside the couch, dropping the room into firelight only, and watched from the shadowed side of the window. The figure didn't move. It waited, and the waiting felt personal, like it was patient enough to let me talk myself into the mistake. I tried my phone again. No service. I tried the emergency text feature. It spun and failed. When I looked back, the figure was closer by 10 feet, close enough that I knew it hadn't been pushed by wind. It had walked, and the storm was loud enough to hide the crunch. I locked the deadbolt again, even though it was already locked, slid the chain, and dragged the entry bench across the door. I pulled the curtain an inch, and saw the figure's head tilt, tracking the movement, and that tiny reaction proved it could see far better than I wanted to believe. Another lull came, and with it, a long, slow scratch along the outside of the window frame, as if someone were dragging metal over painted wood, tracing the window like an outline. The scratch stopped exactly where the latch was, as if it were taking notes. The figure was at the porch, now head tilted toward the glass, snow melting on its coat and streaking dark water down. A gloved hand pressed to the pane, leaving a clear print in the frost, 5 fingers splayed. Then the knuckles knocked once. Not frantic, a courtesy knock. It leaned close and mouthed a word. The glass fogged around its lips. I couldn't hear it over the wind, but I could read it open. I shook my head. The figure's smile widened slightly, like it appreciated the response. It stepped back and vanished into the white. I stood there, staring at nothing, waiting for my heart to slow, and that's when the banging started. At the kitchen window, 3 heavy knocks that rattled dishes. A shadow slid past the glass. It hadn't vanished at all. It had simply moved where I couldn't see it. The knocks hopped from window to window, bathroom, mudroom, bedroom, each set spaced just long enough to make me chase the sound. The message was clear. I can be anywhere around you, whenever I want. At one point, the doorknob on the mudroom door turned slowly and stopped like a gentle test, and I felt my stomach drop because the touch was controlled, not desperate. I backed away and realized I was doing exactly what it wanted, moving when it moved me. I sat in the center of the living room, where I could see both doors poker across my knees, fire crackling, and force myself to stop reacting. The cabin creaked. The wind rose. My eyes burned from staring. When I crawled to the side window again, the yard was empty. For a second I wondered if I'd imagined everything. Then I saw it farther out on the lake. Near the dock, a dark vertical shape standing on the ice, watching the cabin from the one place I wouldn't think to look. A terrible thought hit me. It wanted me to leave. It wanted me outside where the cold could do the work. The storm wasn't the obstacle. It was the weapon. The porch light blinked and went out in a clean snap, as if someone wanted the house darker than the storm could make it. A flashlight beam swept across my front door, then my window, searching, and I stayed still behind the couch until the beam slid away. I lunged for my keys, thinking I could at least trigger the car alarm, and realized the hook was empty. The keys were gone. I rushed to the kitchen drawer for the carving knife and found it empty too. I opened the pantry, the bathroom, cabinet, every place my hands could reach, and the absence followed me like a shadow. From outside the front door, a voice carried through the wood, calm and close, like someone leaning their mouth to the crack. "Don't go out," it said. "It's worse out there." The voice wasn't raspy with cold. It was warm, confident, almost friendly, and that made my skin crawl because it meant the storm was not hurting them the way it would hurt me. The voice paused, as if listening, then added quieter. "You can't see me when the wind picks up, but I can see you when the fire flares." I glanced at the fireplace and realized the flames were a spotlight that gave away every move I made. I backed into the hallway, trying to put walls between me and the door, and the doorknob turned again, this time with a slow confidence that said it wasn't checking the lock for the first time. Something scratched lightly near the deadbolt, metal on metal, careful as if a tool were being seated and adjusted. I held my breath until my lungs hurt, and the scratching stopped. A soft chuckle drifted through the door, the sound of someone satisfied with the experiment, and then footsteps moved off the porch, circling the house at an easy pace. The realization hit like a punch. The figure hadn't only been outside. It had been inside earlier quietly, while I was distracted taking what it wanted and leaving no trace except my growing disbelief. The storm gave it all the cover it needed. Then through the wind a distant engine growl rose and steadied, accompanied by the scrape of a blade. A plow. Real. Close enough that hope hurt. I ran to the window and waved both arms until my shoulder ached, then pounded the glass until my knuckles stung. Outside, the flashlight beam snapped away and vanished into the white. Headlights appeared like two dull suns turning into the drive. The driver climbed down, radio in hand, and his eyes went immediately to the snow around the cabin. There were footprints everywhere, a tight ring pressed into the drifts, circling and circling, as if someone had walked patrol for hours, pausing at every window to listen for my breath. He asked if I'd seen a person in a dark coat, and the way he said it made my stomach drop like he'd heard the description before. Inside, nothing was broken. The locks were intact, but on the kitchen table, placed neatly beside the dead phone and the empty key hook, was a single glove, wet with snow and turned palm up like a greeting. In the center of the palm, pressed into the fabric with a fingertip, were two words written in soot from my fireplace you saw. The knocking started at the living room window, 3 slow taps that sounded too deliberate to be ice. I was snowed in on the first floor of a small duplex, power-out streetlights dead, and the blizzard loud enough to turn the whole neighborhood into a sealed-off box. At first, I didn't move. I just listened, waiting for the wind to explain it away. Then the taps came again, same rhythm, same spacing, as if someone outside was counting. I killed every candle but one, and crouched behind the sofa, peering through a narrow gap in the curtain. Outside was white static, but in the porch-light glow I saw a shape in the yard for half a second. A person in a hood standing too close to the glass head, angled as if listening for my breathing. Before I could decide whether I had really seen them, the shape slipped away, and the knocking moved to the kitchen window, then to the small bathroom window, one after another, like someone was testing the entire perimeter. The worst part was the pacing. It wasn't frantic. It was methodical, like a checklist. Tap, 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 pause. Then the soft crunch of footsteps through snow. Then tap, tap, tap again on the next pane. I grabbed my phone and tried to call 911. No service. I tried the emergency text function. It spun and failed. The landline jack on the wall was empty because the landlord had modernized the place, and I realized the storm had done its job. It had erased every easy way out. I checked the front door. Deadbolt locked. Chain set. I shoved a chair under the knob anyway, then did the same at the back door, even though it was drifted shut from outside. The knocking stopped long enough for my heart to slow, and I hated the silence, because it made me lean forward, listening for the next instruction. Then the taps came from above me. Not the window by the stairs, but the bedroom window on the second floor, the one no one could reach without a ladder. 3 taps, slow, confident, as if the person outside wanted me to understand that height didn't matter. My mouth went dry. I stared up at the ceiling, like I could see through it. The taps moved again to the second bedroom window, then the hallway window, traveling along the upper floor, as neatly as they had along the lower. I whispered no to an empty room, and the empty room answered with another knock, closer, harder, like it had heard me. I crept to the bottom of the stairs, and aimed my phone flashlight upward. The beam shook across the landing. Through the upstairs window glass, I saw for an instant a pale hand and the end of a long object pressed to the pane like a stick or a tool being used to reach. Then the hand withdrew, and the light outside went out. There was a second sound, now fainter than the knocks, a soft metallic scrape near the front porch, as if something were being set down carefully. A ladder. My stomach turned at the thought of someone placing a ladder against my house in the middle of a blizzard, confident the storm would hide it. The taps returned at the living room window, but this time they weren't 3. They were 5, evenly spaced, and between each tap I heard my own breath in the silence. Then, very close to the glass, a voice said, low and calm, "I know you're awake." I didn't answer. I backed away, and the voice continued, almost conversational. "If you don't come to the door, I'll keep going until you do." The taps began again, and the person proved it. Window to window, floor to floor, circling the house like a clock hand, never rushing, never stopping for long. Every time I moved, the tapping paused, then resumed at the nearest pane like it was tracking sound. I tried to think like an adult, and not like prey. I looked for a weapon, kitchen knife, hammer, anything. My hands landed on a can of pepper spray on my key ring, and I realized my keys were on the table where I'd left them. That meant the person outside couldn't have taken them yet, which was supposed to be comforting, but somehow wasn't. A 247 The tapping stopped completely. The silence lasted long enough that I started to believe they'd left. Then I heard a new sound from the upstairs hallway, the soft click of a window latch turning. Not glass breaking, not a smash. A latch, gently flipped, like someone with a gloved hand knew exactly how to work it. I froze at the bottom stair. Another click. Then the faint creak of the sash, lifting against ice. The person wasn't trying to scare me from outside anymore. They were trying to get in where the storm would cover the noise and no one on the street could see. I ran to the kitchen and yanked open the junk drawer for the heavy flashlight, then bolted back to the stairs and shouted, I called the police, even though it was a lie. The tapping resumed immediately louder, now not at a window, but at the interior wall beside the stairs, as if someone inside the house had answered from the other side. That impossibility made my vision swim. The taps weren't only outside, or the person had already climbed in. I backed into the living room and aimed the pepper spray at the staircase like it was a gun waiting for a shape to appear. A head rose over the top, step slow hooded, and the face under the hood was pale in the dim eyes reflecting my phone light. I sprayed, without thinking, a hot stream that painted the air. The figure jerked back with a sharp inhale and disappeared up the stairs again. I heard frantic coughing, then the heavy thump of someone stumbling into a wall, and for the first time that night, I heard real panic in the noise. It wasn't supernatural. It was human. That thought should have helped, but it didn't, because human meant it could learn. I stayed at the bottom of the stairs, shaking, listening as the figure moved across the upper floor, opening and closing doors, testing, searching. Then, through the storm, a distant engine growled, and a blade scraped. A plow. Headlights washed across my windows, like sunrise. I screamed and hammered on the glass, and the footsteps upstairs paused, then rushed faster than before toward the back of the house. A window slammed. Cold air surged somewhere, and then there was only wind. When the deputy arrived with the plow driver, minutes later, they found a ladder in the snow beside my siding, placed carefully under the upstairs window, like a tool left out for tomorrow. They found gloved prints on the sash, and a single smear of pepper spray on the glass. They did not find the person, but the deputy did find something else that turned my stomach a line of small knocks, 5 little dents in the frost on every window around the house, each one at the same height, like someone had used the exact same rhythm to practice. Patience. On my front mat, tucked under the doormat so the wind couldn't take it, was my spare key. The one I kept hidden for emergencies turned over, so I could see the teeth. The message wasn't written. It was implied the storm didn't just hide the ladder and the footsteps. It had also given someone time to search my porch, find what I thought was clever, and set it back, like a promise. When daylight finally came and the wind dropped, the neighborhood looked normal again, but my windows didn't. Each pane still held a faint circle where a glove had warmed the frost, as if someone had pressed their face close and listened to my house breathe. I moved out a week later, but even now, when winter wind hits my apartment windows, I still count the taps before I let myself breathe. The man in the road didn't wave like someone who needed help. He stood just off the center line, with his arms at his sides, letting my headlights paint him white. And when I slowed down, he took one step toward my car, like he'd been waiting for the exact moment my tires would lose the courage to keep rolling. The blizzard had already turned the county road into a featureless tunnel, and I was only out because my job at the clinic had run late, and my boss kept insisting the storm wasn't that bad yet. By the time I hit the rural stretch, it was bad enough that every mailbox looked like a person, and every drift looked like a ditch ready to swallow me. My phone was a blank slab with no bars. The radio was all static and emergency tones. I should have kept driving. Instead, I cracked my window an inch because he looked cold and because guilt is a powerful accelerator in the wrong direction. "Are you okay?" I shouted. He leaned in without hesitation, close enough that snow blew off his jacket onto my dashboard. He was maybe mid-40s, beanie pulled, low cheeks red, but his eyes were steady, not frantic, not glassy with panic. "Thank God," he said. "My car's in the ditch back there. I've been walking. I just need a ride to the next house." I'm freezing. His voice was too smooth, the sentences too complete. People in real distress ramble or stutter or forget details. He already had a script. I looked past him, into the whiteout. "Where's your car?" I asked. He pointed behind him with a gloved thumb. "2 bends back," he said. "You can't see it now. Snow's covering everything." That was plausible. Everything was covered. He kept talking quickly before I could think. I tried my phone. No service. I knocked at one place. No answer. "Please, just the next house. I don't want to die out here." The word "die" is a key that opens a lot of doors. I unlocked the passenger side and he climbed in, shutting the door with care, like he didn't want it to sound loud. The inside of my car felt instantly smaller, like his body had changed the air. He didn't shiver. He didn't rub his hands. He just looked around, eyes flicking to my center console, my cup holder, the small pepper spray on my keyring. "Thanks," he said, softly. "You're a good person." The compliment made my stomach tighten. Good person. The phrase people use when they want you to keep being useful. "What's your name?" I asked. "Mark," he said without pause. "I live up near Cedar Cut." He said a place name I recognized from a sign 10 miles back. Then he added, as if remembering, "My wife's pregnant. She's about to kill me if I don't get home." He laughed gentle, and for a second he sounded normal enough that my brain tried to relax. I put the car in drive and crept forward, following the faint tracks I'd already made. Mark sat facing forward, posture calm. "You headed toward town?" he asked. "Yes," I said, carefully. "Clinic." "Good," he murmured. "Good. Town's safer." He paused, then turned his head slightly toward me. "Don't go fast," he said. "There's a drift up ahead that'll spin you." The way he said it, confident, certain, made me glance at him. "How do you know?" I asked. He smiled, faintly. "I've been watching cars all night," he said. "I hear them before I see them. That should have been a warning." It sounded like a hunter describing a stand. A minute later, through the white, I saw something dark on the shoulder. A vehicle half buried, hazard lights blinking weakly. My pulse jumped. "Is that your car?" I asked. Mark didn't look at it. "No," he said. "That one's been there since earlier. Mine's father." He said it too quickly. I slowed anyway and angled my headlights toward the shape. For a split second I saw inside empty driver's seat, no movement, snow piled on the hood like icing. Not helpful. "We should stop and check," I said, because my brain still wanted this to be a normal problem. Mark's hand touched my forearm lightly, the smallest contact, but it made every muscle in my body tense. "Don't," he said. "If you stop, you're done. You'll get stuck. Keep rolling." He removed his hand, as if he hadn't meant anything by it. I kept rolling, but now my mind was awake. I tried to picture his story: a car in a ditch, a pregnant wife walking in a blizzard. Then I noticed his jacket. It was damp at the shoulders, yes, but the lower half was oddly dry. If he'd been trudging through drifts, his pants would be soaked. His boots, too, were clean, not caked with snow. The storm was loud, but my thoughts were louder. "Which house were you going to?" I asked. Mark pointed ahead into nothing. "The one with the red barn," he said. I blinked. In this whiteout, you couldn't see a barn from 20 feet. "You can't see that," I said. Mark chuckled softly. "I know these roads," he replied. Then, in the same calm tone, he added, "Take the next left. It cuts behind the ridge. Less wind." There was no next left. Not for miles. The ridgeline was straight. I knew because I drove it twice a week. I swallowed. "There's no left," I said. Mark didn't argue. He just stared forward. "There will be," he said, and something in his voice wasn't persuasion anymore. It was expectation. I tightened my grip on the wheel. "I'm taking you to town," I said. Mark's head turned toward me slowly. His eyes had lost their warmth. "Town's closed," he said. "They shut the road at the intersection. You'll waste gas. Better to go to my place. It's close." "No," I said. "I'm not doing that." Mark sighed, almost sad, like I'd disappointed him. "You picked me up," he said softly. "Now you're responsible." The word responsible landed wrong. It sounded like ownership. My heart pounded. I glanced at the door locks and hit the button to lock them all, even though they already were. Mark watched my thumb do it. He didn't react. He just smiled faintly. "Smart," he said. "But locks are for outside." The heater fan suddenly dropped in pitch as if the engine had hiccuped. My dashboard lights flickered once. Mark's gaze snapped to them with quick interest. "Battery's weak," he observed. "You've been idling a lot." "No," I said. "It's fine." Mark leaned back and looked at the glove compartment latch. "You keep jumper cables?" he asked. The question was casual, but it wasn't random. It was inventory. I didn't answer. Mark's hand drifted toward the center console, not grabbing, just hovering like a test. "Listen," he said, voice low. "Now, if you stop out here, you'll freeze. People don't realize how fast it happens. Car becomes a coffin. So we're going to be practical." He pointed ahead. Through the white, a faint glow appeared. Porch light, maybe, or just reflection. "That's my place," he said, even though it could have been anything. "Pull in." I felt my mouth go dry. I made myself speak clearly, loudly, like a person on a recorded line. "I'm not taking you to your house," I said. "I'll call the police the moment I have service." Mark smiled, and in that smile I saw he didn't care about police because he didn't expect them to arrive in a blizzard. "Service won't come back," he said. Not tonight. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a pair of keys that weren't iced, weren't wet, and he held them up between us for a second. "These aren't yours," he said, almost playful. I stared. He dropped them into my cup holder with a soft clink. "A key fob. A house key. Found them on the road," he continued as if explaining. "People drop things when they panic." He looked at my ignition area, then at my keyring hanging from the column. "You've got a nice set," he added. "Easy to copy." My stomach turned. This wasn't about getting warm. This was about access. I felt the car drift slightly as my hands shook. I forced myself to breathe, to do the simplest, safest thing, get witnesses. Ahead the line of the road met a wider intersection, where I knew even without signs visible there was a small volunteer fire station. If anyone had generator power in a storm, it would be there. I kept driving toward where it should be, ignoring Mark's quiet instructions. Mark's calm began to crack. "Stop," he said. "You're going the wrong way." I didn't answer. He reached toward the gear shift, and my body reacted before my brain. I slapped his hand away hard and shouted, "Don't touch me." The shout felt huge in the small car. Mark stared at me, surprised, then amused. "You're loud," he said. "No one can hear you." "Maybe they can." I snapped, and I laid on the horn, holding it down until it became one long screaming note, swallowed by wind. Mark flinched, actual irritation flashing. He grabbed for the horn pad. I swerved slightly, keeping control by sheer panic, and kept the horn pressed. Through the white, a red shape emerged exactly where it should, the fire station bay door half buried, with a generator light glowing above it. A truck sat out front, snow piled on its hood. I swung into the lot and stopped, hard tires sliding. Mark's hand shot to the door handle. Locked. He looked at me, and in his eyes I saw the moment he decided whether to escalate. Then the bay door lifted a foot with a groan, and a man in a reflective jacket stepped out, raising an arm to block wind. The horn had done its job. Mark's posture shifted instantly. The predator mask slid back under a polite smile. He lifted his hands in a small shrug like he was just an unlucky traveler. I threw my door open and ran through drifting snow toward the firefighter, yelling, words that came out broken. "I don't know him. He's lying. He." The firefighter's eyes narrowed, taking in my shaking hands. Mark's calm face, the locked passenger. Door. Another volunteer appeared behind him. Mark stepped out slowly, careful not to look aggressive, and said, "She's panicking." I just needed help. The firefighter didn't answer right away. He walked to my car and looked into the cup holder where Mark had dropped the keys. He picked them up and held them between two fingers. "Whose are these?" he asked. Mark's smile faltered, the tiniest glitch. "Not mine," Mark said. The firefighter nodded once, as if confirming something, and spoke into his radio. Mark's eyes flicked toward the road, calculating escape routes, but the lot was already filling with movement. A second truck engine, turning over a flashlight, beam sweeping. In the end, Mark didn't get dragged away in handcuffs that night. The storm gave him a gap. While the volunteers argued about what to do without deputies able to reach them, Mark stepped backward, then sideways, then simply vanished into the white, as if he belonged to it. Later, when a state trooper finally arrived after dawn, he listened to my story, and then said, very quietly, "We've had calls like this. Stranded motorist. Need warmth. Same pattern." He looked at the keys again. They belonged to a house 2 miles from where I'd picked Mark up. The homeowner had reported them missing earlier that week, along with a spare garage keypad remote. Mark hadn't been walking from a ditch. He'd been walking from someone else's porch, using the storm like a curtain, waiting for a good person to stop long enough for him to decide what else he could take. The basement door closed behind me with a soft, polite click, and for half a second I felt relieved because the wind couldn't reach me down there. Then I heard the deadbolt slide on the outside, slow and deliberate, and relief turned into a cold, pure panic that had nothing to do with temperature. I'd been snowed in at my aunt's old house for 2 days. a place with thick walls and a narrow stairwell that swallowed sound. And when the neighbor knocked at dusk and said he had a problem with the furnace, I went, because I was raised to help, and because the storm had made the whole neighborhood feel like a single-stranded ship. His name was Brian, mid-30s, friendly in a tired way, the kind of neighbor who always offered to shovel and always asked if you needed anything, in a tone that made you feel slightly indebted. The blackout had hit around noon. By evening, everyone's breath was visible indoors. Brian stood on my porch in a headlamp snow crusted on his jacket and said, "My heat's gone. I think the pilot's out. I can't get the basement door open from inside. Can you take a look? Just a minute." His voice sounded embarrassed, like he hated asking. I hesitated. "Why can't you open it?" I asked. He shrugged. "Old latch. It sticks. I've been fighting it, and I don't want to break it." He smiled quickly. "You're the only one who's been up and moving. Everyone else's lights are out." That was true. Most houses were dark. The storm had made people fold into themselves. I grabbed my flashlight and followed him next door through drifting snow that came up to my calves. His house looked identical to mine from the outside, but inside it felt different, colder, emptier, with a faint chemical smell under the stale air, like a cleaning product used to erase something. "Basement's through here," Brian said, leading me to a narrow door off the kitchen. He opened it, and the stairwell yawned, downward, dark and steep. "It's just the latch at the bottom," he said. "I'll stay up here. You tell me what you see." The fact he didn't want to go down with me should have stopped me. Instead, I told myself he was being considerate, that he didn't want to crowd me, and I started down. The wooden steps creaked under my boots. The air got colder, with each step damp enough to make my skin itch. At the bottom, my flashlight beam caught a concrete floor, stacked storage bins, and the furnace unit against the far wall. The pilot light was off, sure, but that wasn't what made my stomach drop. It was the chain on the inside of the basement door, thick and new, like someone had installed it recently and wanted it strong. "Brian," I called up the stairs. "There's a chain down here." "Yeah," he called back, voice muffled. "Previous owner. Safety." Then he added too casually, "Can you slide it back for me?" I turned toward the door, reached up, and felt the chain's cold metal. It moved, easily. I slid it free. "Okay," I said. Now what above me? Brian's boots shifted. "Just check the pilot," he said. "I've got a lighter up here, if you need it." His voice was calm, and in that calm I didn't hear the decision being made. I crouched by the furnace, searching for the instruction plate in the flashlight glare. My hands were stiff from cold. The steps behind me creaked once, then stopped. I looked over my shoulder and saw nothing but stairwell darkness. "Brian," I called again. No answer. The air felt suddenly thicker. I stood and walked back toward the stairs. Halfway the basement light an old pull-cord bulb, flickered once as if it had power, then died, leaving only my flashlight cone. I climbed 2 steps and called again. "Brian, are you there?" A soft sound answered me. The basement door, closing at the top, not slammed, not rushed, just shut. Then the deadbolt slid into place with a slow scrape. I froze. "Brian," I said, louder, "now, open the door." Silence. I ran up the remaining steps and hit the door with my shoulder. It didn't budge. I grabbed the knob and twisted. Locked. I banged hard. "Open it," I shouted, and my voice echoed down the stairwell, like it belonged to someone else. Finally, Brian spoke, and he spoke close to the door, as if he'd been standing there, listening the whole time. "Stop yelling," he said softly. "You'll waste air." The sentence made no sense, and that's why it terrified me. It wasn't a normal argument. It was a different set of rules. "Why did you lock it?" I demanded. Brian sighed, like I was being dramatic. "Because you were going to leave," he said, as if that explained everything. "Everyone leaves. It's rude." My chest tightened. "Let me out," I said. Brian didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He simply stated, "Calm as weather. Not until you calm down." I hit the door again, hard enough to make my shoulder flare with pain. Above, I heard him walk away. Footsteps retreating across the kitchen, slow and unhurried, A minute later, the radio in his living room clicked on. A low, steady blizzard static filled the house, like he wanted noise to cover my banging if anyone passed by. I forced myself to stop and listen. The basement had another door, a small exterior bulkhead on the far wall, the kind old houses use for coal delivery. I sprinted to it, heart-pounding flashlight beam bouncing wildly. The bulkhead was there, metal doors set into the foundation. I tried the handle. It moved a fraction, then stopped. A padlock held it shut from the outside. I stared at it, breath fogging in my scarf, and felt the first real wave of hopelessness. He'd prepared. This wasn't a mistake. It was an arrangement. I paced, trying to think like a problem solver, not prey. The basement had shelves, old tools, a workbench, boxes labeled Christmas, and taxes. I found a pry bar and jammed it into the door seam at the top of the stairs, trying to force it. The wood groaned but didn't give. My arms shook with effort. From above, Brian's voice drifted down, conversational. "That's not going to work," he said. "It's solid oak." I went still. "You're listening," I said. "Of course," he replied, as if I'd asked something silly. "I'm responsible now. Storm's bad. Anything could happen." The way he said responsible made my skin crawl, because I'd heard that word before from other men who thought help was a contract. I tried my phone. No service, no emergency text, nothing but the dim glow of the screen. I forced myself to breathe slowly because panic eats oxygen, and I couldn't afford it. Then I noticed something near the furnace, a vent grate in the foundation wall, about a foot square with cold air pushing through it in a thin stream. A crawlspace vent. I yanked the grate free with the pry bar. Behind it was a tight opening packed with insulation. I ripped at it with bare hands until my fingers burned. Beyond the insulation, a narrow tunnel ran under the porch, the kind small animals use. It smelled like wet earth and old wood. It was too small for comfort, but it was a way out that Brian might not have fully controlled. I shoved my flashlight ahead, crawled in on my stomach, and felt the cold dirt soak through my jeans instantly. Above me, the house creaked. Somewhere Brian moved a faint vibration through the floorboards, like a giant shifting his weight. I didn't know if he could hear me, but I knew the storm could hide almost anything. I crawled forward inch by inch, dragging my body through the narrow space, trying not to think about getting stuck. After a few feet, the tunnel angled up and I pressed my hand against something hard, a wooden panel. I pushed. It didn't move. I pushed again harder and felt it flex, slightly. It was a loose access. Hatch, under the front porch. Steps. Brian hadn't sealed everything. Hope hit so sharp it made my eyes water. I kicked at the panel until it shifted enough to let snow spill in cold and bright. I shoved it again and wriggled out into the night, under the porch, half buried, but outside. The wind punched me, immediately. I crawled out from under the steps and stumbled into the yard, sucking air like I'd been underwater. The neighborhood was dark, but one house down the street had a generator glow. I ran toward it through drifts, arms pumping, throat raw from yelling a name I didn't even know if anyone would answer. A man opened the door, startled, and I blurted everything in a rush basement locked neighbor storm. He didn't question the details. He grabbed a flashlight, a phone, and a heavy jacket, and went with me while his wife called 911 the moment her phone caught a flicker of signal on generator power. When we reached Brian's house, the kitchen was quiet. The basement door was closed. The deadbolt was set. We pounded anyway. Brian, the man, shouted, "Open up." Silence. Then from inside, Brian's voice came calm and irritated. "What is this?" The man didn't argue. He shouldered the door hard. The frame cracked. On the second hit, it gave. We rushed in. The basement stairwell smelled damp and metallic. At the bottom, my footprints and torn insulation were proof enough. The bulkhead was still padlocked. Brian stood in the living room in his socks, like he'd been watching TV face, arranged into confusion. "She went into my basement without asking," he said smoothly. "She's hysterical." My rescuer didn't even look at him. He looked at the deadbolt at the radio, turned up to blizzard static, at the new chain hardware on the inside of the basement door, and his expression hardened into something simple and certain. "That's not how neighbors act," he said. When deputies finally arrived, hours later, In a high-clearance truck, Brian's story changed twice. First, it was a misunderstanding. Then it was a prank. Then it was that he'd locked it for safety because he didn't want me wandering in his house. None of it explained the padlock on the bulkhead, or the way he'd talked about air and calming down like the basement was a room designed for waiting. I spent the rest of the storm at the generator house, wrapped in borrowed blankets, shaking with adrenaline that wouldn't drain. The part that stayed with me wasn't the lock. It was how quiet the click had been, how polite it sounded. Like the difference between freedom and captivity can be one small metal sound that nobody outside will ever hear over the wind. The window was the only thing in the house that still behaved like it belonged to me, and even then it fought me until my palms bled because it had been painted shut in summer and frozen solid by winter, and I was trying to force it open, while a stranger stood on the other side of the bathroom door, listening to my breathing like it was a countdown. I'd been snowed in for 2 days at a remote rental, with no service and no power, the kind of place people romanticize until the silence starts sounding like footsteps. The storm came in fast, closed the county road, and trapped me on a hill surrounded by pines that bent and snapped in the wind. I stocked up at the last gas station and told myself I'd be fine. Then late the first night, someone knocked. Not frantic, not desperate. 2 slow taps on the front door, then a pause, then 2 more. When I didn't answer, the taps moved to the side window, as if whoever it was wanted me to know they could reach any part of the house. I kept the deadbolt, thrown the chain on, and my voice calm when I called through the wood, "Go away." A man answered close enough that his breath fogged the peephole from the outside. "I'm stuck down the road," he said. "Car's buried. I saw your porch light. Please, I just need to warm up." My porch light was off. The power was out. That was the first lie, and it was so smooth I almost missed it. I said, "No." He didn't get angry. He got patient. "Okay," he said softly. "I'll wait here. It's safer by the house." Then he stepped off the porch, and I heard his boots crunch in a slow circle around my cabin, like he was taking inventory. I moved through the place with my flashlight, checking windows, checking the back door, checking the mudroom. Everything was locked. Everything felt sealed. That's when my phone buzzed once, just a phantom vibration, and died. I tried the landline the host had bragged about in the listing. Dead. I told myself it was storm damage. Then I heard a new sound outside, the scrape of something metal against the siding near where the phone line entered the house, careful and controlled, like someone using a tool. The man wasn't waiting. He was working. I retreated to the living room, kept the fire going, and stayed awake until my eyes burned. Around 3:00 a.m., the front door creaked, once not opening, just shifting on its frame, and a voice slipped through the crack, amused and close. "You're tired," he said. That's when people make mistakes. I didn't answer. I clutched the fireplace poker and watched the windows reflect the fire like dark mirrors. When I finally nodded off from exhaustion, I woke to the sound of the back door rattling, as if someone had tested it and moved on. Morning came grey and brutal. The wind didn't drop. The road stayed invisible. I tried to shove the back door open and found it packed with snow like concrete. The storm had sealed me inside. That's when I smelled it. Faint gasoline. Not from my generator because I didn't have one, but from somewhere else. Like someone had spilled a little fuel outside the kitchen window and wanted me to know they had resources I didn't. The second night, the knocks came again, but not at the door. At the windows. One by one, slow, even taps, moving around the cabin in a neat loop. I stopped chasing the sound because I realized that's what it wanted. I stayed in the center of the house and listened. When the taps reached the bedroom window, the voice returned, softer, as if it were speaking directly into my ear through the glass. "You can't sleep forever," it said. "I can." Sometime after midnight, I heard the worst sound, yet the faint click of my mudroom door handle turning from the inside. Not the exterior handle, the interior. The sound was small, almost polite, but it meant one thing. Someone was in the mudroom. I stood frozen, poker raised, staring at the hallway. My mind tried to make excuses, because excuses are easier than truth. Maybe the wind shifted the latch. Maybe the wood contracted. Then the mudroom door opened. A fraction in a thin line of colder air slid into my living room. I saw a shadow in the crack, tall, still. A whisper came through, calm and pleased. "There you are." I ran. I didn't run toward the front door because he was between me and it. I ran to the bathroom because it had the one lock that worked, and the one window I hadn't bothered with because it looked small and useless. I slammed the bathroom door, turned the lock, and jammed my shoulder against it. The knob turned immediately from the other side, gentle pressure testing. The voice came through, conversational. "You don't have to do this hard," it said. "You can be reasonable." I didn't answer. I shoved my flashlight into my pocket and grabbed the towel bar with both hands and ripped. It came off with a crack of drywall. I didn't care. I stepped onto the toilet lid and attacked the window. It was a small casement above the tub, painted shut, frosted with ice. I punched the frame with the metal bar until the paint seam split. The sound felt impossibly loud in the tiny room. The voice outside the door paused, listening, then chuckled softly like I'd entertained him. "That window," he said. "That's your plan." The knob turned again, harder. The door flexed. The lock held for now. I wedged the towel bar through the window latch and levered. The latch didn't move at first. I hit it again. My hands shook so badly the metal slipped and bit into my palm. Warm blood smeared the cold frame. I forced my fingers to keep working. Another shove. The latch popped with a tiny metallic snap that sounded like freedom. I pushed the window outward. It moved an inch and stopped against drifted snow. I shoved again. Snow spilled and stinging my face. Outside was pure white, no horizon, no sense of direction. But I didn't need direction. I needed outside. Behind me, the bathroom door shuddered once hard, and the lock finally cracked. The door opened a finger width. A gloved hand pushed through the gap, feeling for the latch like a blind insect. I shoved my body through the window opening, scraping my ribs, and dropped into snow up to my waist. The cold hit like a punch, stealing breath, but panic gives you oxygen you didn't know you had. I waded away from the cabin wall, fighting drifts, trying to keep my head above the white. I didn't run straight because you can't in waist-high snow. I stumbled, fell, crawled, got up. Behind me, the bathroom window frame groaned as something moved through it, and I heard the voice again, no longer amused. "Get back inside," it snapped, the first real crack in his calm. I didn't look back. I moved toward the only thing that could guide me: sound. In a storm, engines carry differently, and I had been listening so hard for so long that when I heard the distant grind of a plow blade, it felt like hearing my name. I screamed until my throat tore and waved both arms, a dark speck in a white world. The plow's lights appeared, then vanished behind a gust, then appeared again closer, like a slow sunrise. It stopped near the bottom of the drive. The driver climbed down and shouted something I couldn't hear over the wind. I fell forward, sobbing words that didn't form sentences. He grabbed my arm and hauled me toward the cab, and in the brief sweep of his headlights I saw the cabin behind me, clearly for the first time. That night the front door opened a few inches, a dark figure standing just inside the threshold, watching me leave, not chasing into the snow, not needing to, because the storm could have finished me if the plow hadn't come when it did. The driver radioed a deputy. When the deputy arrived, they approached the cabin together, weapons drawn, voices loud. The figure was gone. Inside, nothing was smashed. Nothing was obviously stolen. That would have been too simple. What they did find was worse. My landline cord neatly unplugged and coiled, like someone had handled it calmly. My car keys placed on the kitchen table beside an empty mug that hadn't been there before, and the bathroom door lock broken inward, in a clean split, as if someone had tested exactly how much force it took. The deputy looked at the window I'd escaped through, and then at the drift piled beneath it, and his face tightened. "He knew you'd go there," he said quietly. "He piled snow under it to slow you down." In the white outside footprints circled the cabin in slow, neat loops, stopping at every window like a person walking a museum exhibit. And on the inside of the bathroom door, where my shoulder had been pressed, Someone had written 2 words in the condensation, with a fingertip, small and careful, like a reminder rather than a threat. Should've slept. You don't really understand what snowed in means until day 2. When the novelty dies, the silence stops feeling peaceful, and you realize the person sharing the cabin with you isn't trapped the way you are. They're choosing to stay because the storm has finally given them privacy. I booked the place for 3 nights to rent a cheap little cabin off a forest road with a fireplace and a view of pines. The kind of listing that sells isolation as a luxury. The host messaged a code and a cheerful note about how the plow usually comes by mid-morning. I arrived late afternoon, with groceries, my laptop, and the soft arrogance of someone who believes planning equals control. By sundown, the blizzard turned the world into a white wall. My car slid once in the drive and settled into the snow like it was being tucked in. I told myself it was fine. I had food. I had heat. I had time. The first sign I wasn't alone came at 1118 p.m. when I heard the upstairs floorboards creak. The cabin didn't have an upstairs. It had a loft, and the loft ladder was folded up against the wall where I'd left it. I froze, listening, and told myself it was the wind shifting wood. Then a muffled thump came from above, followed by a slow drag like something heavy being moved carefully across planks. My heart hammered. I grabbed my flashlight and aimed it at the loft hatch. Nothing moved. The hatch stayed closed. The fire snapped. The wind screamed. I stood there until my knees hurt, then decided the simplest answer was the safest old cabin old sounds. I went to bed with the poker beside me and slept in ugly bursts. In the morning, the world was white and silent, the kind of quiet that only happens when snow eats every hard edge. The road was gone. The plow hadn't come. My phone had 1 bar that blinked on and off, like a dying pulse. I made coffee on the gas stove, tried to laugh at myself, and started rationing firewood because the host had left only 2 stacks. Day 1 is when you still treat a storm like weather. Day 2 is when it becomes a situation. The second night around 9:00, the fireplace flared brighter than it should have. I looked up and saw a new log settle into the flames, placed with intention, not dropped. I hadn't touched the wood. My skin went cold. I stood and checked the room like a cop, every corner lit by orange firelight. Nothing. No movement. No footprints inside, just my own tracks. Then I noticed the loft ladder was down. Not fully extended, but lowered 2 rungs, like someone had started to climb and then stopped, leaving it halfway as a message. My mouth went dry. I grabbed my phone and tried 911. No service. I tried emergency SOS. It spun, then failed. Outside, wind covered everything. Inside, the cabin felt smaller with each breath. I did what people do when their brain can't accept the big truth. I focused on small tasks. I checked locks, deadbolt, chain. I checked windows, frozen shut. I checked the back door, jammed by drifted snow. I told myself I was safe because the doors were locked and the storm was a wall. Then I went to the pantry area and saw it. My granola bars were missing. Not the whole box. 2 bars. A neat theft, the kind that makes you doubt yourself. I stared at the empty space until anger rose, because anger feels better than fear. I counted my cans. 1 missing. I opened my trash. Only 1 can. Not a mistake. Someone had taken food. My hands shook. I walked to the loft ladder and shone my flashlight up into the hatch. The beam caught insulation, a low ceiling, and a shadow that didn't match wood grain. I held my breath. The shadow shifted slightly, and a soft voice came down through the opening, calm and close. Don't shine that in my eyes. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My throat locked. The voice sighed, as if I'd inconvenienced it. You've been stomping around all day, it said. I waited for quiet. I backed away, poker raised. Who are you? I managed. The voice sounded male, maybe 30s, warm, not shivering, which meant he had been in the cabin before I arrived, or had shelter I didn't know about. Does it matter? He asked softly. Storm's the same either way. I swallowed. Get out, I said. The voice chuckled, where it replied gentle, like explaining to a child. I can't go outside. You can't go outside. That's the whole point. The words hit like a fist. He wasn't asking for help. He was describing a condition he enjoyed. I'm calling the police, I said. The voice didn't rise. It didn't threaten. It simply stated, phone lines cut. Service won't come back until morning, maybe later. Plow won't come until the wind drops. You know that. You've been listening to the weather radio. My stomach turned because he was right. I had been listening to the radio, and I hadn't told anyone else about it. He had heard it too. He had been there the whole time. Why are you doing this? I whispered. The answer came after a pause, like he'd considered honesty. Because people pay to be alone, he said. And then they realize they hate it. They do anything to change it. I'm just early. The loft creaked, and I stepped back instinctively. Stay up there, I said. Don't come down. The voice softened, almost kind. I wasn't going to, it said. Not yet. Then it added quieter. You're better awake. Sleep is when people forget doors. I didn't sleep. I sat in a chair with the poker across my knees and the fire low so the light wouldn't advertise my movement. Hours stretched. The cabin popped and sighed. Sometimes the loft creaked gently like he shifted his weight. Once I heard him unwrap something and chew slowly, the sound of him eating my food in the dark like it was a privilege. You took my supplies, I said, voice hoarse. We're both stuck, he replied. Shared resources. The casualness made me shake with rage. That's theft, I snapped. He laughed, softly. Call someone, he said. Oh, right. Day 3 began with grey light, and the sound of the wind dropping just enough to make hope feel possible. My phone caught a single bar for a minute, then none. I didn't waste it on a call that wouldn't connect. I used it to draft one message and hit send again and again until once a tiny check mark appeared. If you don't hear from me by tonight, call police. Cabin off. Forest Route 9, near mile marker 14. Stranger inside. Snowed in. I sent it to my sister, the one person who would take it seriously. The bar vanished immediately after. The cabin was quiet for a long time. Too quiet. Then the loft ladder shifted. One rung lowered. Then another. Slow. Controlled. He was coming down now because the wind had dropped enough that the cabin didn't hide sound as well, and he didn't like that. I stood poker, raised heart, hammering. His head appeared at the hatch beanie pulled low, face pale from lack of light, eyes steady and dry. He wasn't panicked. He wasn't starving. He looked like someone who had been comfortable in the dark for a long time. You look terrible, he said, almost amused. You should eat. Go back up, I said. He didn't. He climbed down, one step at a time. Hands visible, as if performing harmlessness. When his boots touched the floor, he stopped and looked around the cabin like he was finally seeing it properly. Nice place, he said. You picked well. I pointed the poker at him. Leave, I repeated, even though we both knew it was a lie. He smiled, faintly. If I go outside, I die, he said. If you go outside, you die. So let's stop saying leave. He took a step toward the kitchen. I stepped with him, keeping distance, keeping the poker between us. You're not touching anything else, I said. He glanced at the poker, then at my hands, shaking on it, and his smile widened slightly. You're tired, he observed. That's dangerous. Then he did something that made my blood go cold. He reached up and turned the thermostat knob on the wall, clicking it as if it worked, even without power, then looked at me like he was waiting for me to understand. Heat goes out, you get desperate, he said softly. Desperate people open doors. He walked to the front door, not to open it, but to touch the chain with one finger, making it clink gently like tapping a fish tank. You can keep the chain, he said. It's cute. My vision tunneled. I realized I was playing defense inside a shrinking space with a man who had already taken my phone, line, my supplies, and my sleep. I needed something he couldn't control attention. Noise. Consequence. I moved slowly to the smoke detector above the hallway. It had a battery backup. I stood under it and met his eyes. "If you come closer," I said, "I'm pulling it and setting it off until someone hears." He laughed. "Nobody hears out here," he said. "Storm. Trees. Distance." He was right, but I didn't need neighbors. I needed time. I needed him distracted. I needed him to believe I would do something unpredictable. I reached up and ripped the detector down. The alarm shrieked instantly, a piercing scream that filled the cabin and made his calm flicker. His eyes tightened. "Turn it off," he snapped, irritation finally breaking through. I didn't. I held it above my head and kept it screaming. I backed toward the kitchen window and started pounding the glass with my free hand in rhythm with the alarm, a frantic signal. He flinched again, eyes darting toward the window like he hated the idea of being seen. That was my opening. I grabbed the can of lighter fluid from the hearth, the one he hadn't managed to steal, and held it up, his gaze locked onto it. "Don't," he warned, voice suddenly serious. I didn't threaten to burn him. I didn't threaten to burn the cabin. I did something simpler. I sprayed the fluid onto the fireplace logs and threw a handful of kindling in, feeding the flames fast, so they roared high and bright, turning the cabin into a lantern in the white landscape. The alarm screamed. The fire flared. The window glowed. Outside, through the blowing snow, a distant engine note rose faint, then steadier the scrape of a plow blade biting into packed drift. The sound was real enough to make him go still. His head turned toward the window, listening. The irritation on his face shifted into calculation. "No," he muttered, like the storm had betrayed him. I seized the moment and screamed. Not words, just raw sound, and kept the alarm shrieking. Headlights appeared through the trees like two dull suns. The plow had found the road. The man backed away from the light, moving toward the loft ladder, as if that was his exit, and I realized with a sick certainty that the loft wasn't just storage. It was his route, his hide, the place he'd been living, while renters came and went. "Stop," I shouted, and swung the poker at his hands as he reached for the ladder. He jerked back, more surprised than hurt, and for the first time I saw real anger flash. "You should have been quiet," he hissed. Then he moved fast, not toward me, but toward the back of the cabin. He yanked at the rear window frame, the one I'd assumed was frozen shut, and it popped outward because the paint seam had already been cut. He had prepared that too. He slipped out into the snow like he'd done it before. When the plow driver reached my porch and pounded on the door, I flung it open and stumbled into the light, shaking so hard I couldn't stand. The driver took one look at my face and the screaming alarm and called deputies. They searched the cabin first. The loft hatch was scuffed with fresh marks. The insulation had been pushed aside to reveal a narrow crawl corridor along the roofline leading to a hidden access panel behind the chimney. In that corridor, neatly arranged like a traveler's kit, were my missing granola bars, a sleeping bag, a pocket radio tuned to the weather station, and a set of spare keys labeled in small handwriting, "Front, Back, Window." The deputies followed fresh tracks from the rear window into the trees, but the storm was still enough of a curtain to blur the trail within minutes. Later, when I finally got cell service back, my sister's message arrived in a rush of delayed panic. I called. "They're coming. Stay alive." I stared at the kit in the loft and understood the last sick truth: the stranger hadn't been trapped with me for 3 days. He had been living there long before I arrived, waiting for storms, because storms turn paid isolation into forced proximity, and forced proximity turns ordinary people into quiet, obedient prey. The listing disappeared that same afternoon. The host profile vanished. The platform refunded me automatically with an apology that felt obscene. The cabin looked normal again once the wind dropped warm light on snow, peaceful in photos. But I never forgot the sound of him chewing in the dark above my head, calm as a man at home while I rationed food that was already being taken 1 bar at a time.